Hello there, and welcome back to the HistSleep channel. Tonight, we step softly into a quiet Victorian evening. The candles are already lit, their gentle glow resting against the walls of a cold, elegant bedroom, and somewhere in the stillness, a faint scent of dried lavender drifts through the air. Long before modern sleep aids, Victorian women followed a different path to rest, a ritual hidden not in plain sight, but in the quiet corners of their nightly routine. Because sleep, in that era, was not always simple, and what they drank before bed was more than just tea. Imagine this: a small wooden cabinet filled with carefully dried botanicals, lavender, valerian root, rose petals, each one chosen not just for beauty, but for its effect on the mind and body. Tonight, we gently open that cabinet, not to uncover myths, but to understand the real, delicate balance between herbal knowledge and early medicine. Because these evening tonics, they weren't just calming. Some were surprisingly powerful, and a few walked a very fine line between comfort and quiet dependence. So why did Victorian society rely so deeply on these nightly infusions? What did they truly feel as the warmth of those herbal elixirs slowly carried them towards sleep? As the fire softens and the world outside fades into silence, we'll step, slowly and gently, into their ritual, and perhaps, by the end of this evening, you may find yourself drifting, just as they once did, into a softer, quieter kind of sleep. Imagine the heavy curtains being drawn, the thick, velvet fabric sweeping against the floor, shutting out the restless world of London or the quiet, misty moors of the countryside. Outside, the gas lights are flickering in the damp air, but inside, in this room, time has begun to slow down. The air is heavy with the scent of beeswax and the faint, lingering warmth of a dying fire. This was the blue hour, the transition between the frantic demands of the day and the deep, silent mystery of the night. A quiet evening settles over a Victorian manor, like a soft blanket being laid over a sleeping child. Look closely at the walls. The intricate, patterned wallpaper seems to breathe in the dancing shadows as the soft candlelight flickers, casting long, elegant shapes that reach toward the ceiling. In this stillness, every creak of the floorboard feels like a whisper from the past. And it is here, in this very moment of transition, that we find her, a lady of the house, moving with silent grace toward a corner of her chamber. She reaches for a small, silver key, and with a gentle turn, we hear the soft click of a forgotten cabinet. A gentle whisper: "Tonight, we open a forgotten cabinet." This cabinet, hidden behind a vanity or tucked away in a private dressing room, was more than just furniture. It was a portal, a sanctuary of glass and dried leaves. As the door creaks open, the scent hits you, a complex, earthy bouquet of the earth's most quiet offerings. It is the smell of summer gardens, preserved in the dark, waiting to be awakened by the warmth of a kettle. For a Victorian woman, these sleep tonics were her hidden nightly rituals. In an era where her every word, her every dress, and her every movement were governed by rigid social etiquette, this moment was hers. It was a private rebellion against the noise of society. A quiet ceremony performed in the sanctuary of her nightgown, before the heavy mahogany bed claimed her for the night. But what exactly lies within these glass vials? Why did she reach for them with such devotion? Hint: some were calming, like a mother's hand on a fevered brow, but some were stronger than they appeared. You see, the line between a gentle herbal tea and a potent medicinal sedative was very thin in the 19th century. Behind the delicate labels of rosemary or chamomile, there often lay a darker, more potent chemistry. Tonight, we aren't just brewing a drink, we are decoding a lifestyle. We are unearthing the wisdom and the dangers that sat upon a Victorian nightstand. Every drop of these elixirs tells a story of anxiety hidden behind a corset, of the desperate need for true rest, and of the profound connection between the human soul and the botanical world. The world outside may be moving at the speed of light, but here, we are governed only by the slow drip of water and the steady rhythm of our own breathing. Feel the weight of your body as you listen. Imagine the cool touch of the porcelain cup in your hands, the steam rising in gentle, swirling ribbons, carrying with it the secrets of a century ago. These tonics were more than just remedies for insomnia, they were the guardians of the night. They were the bridge between the exhaustion of reality and the limitless landscape of dreams. And as we prepare to explore each herb, each preparation, and each ritual, I invite you to leave the modern world behind. Let the candlelight guide your eyes to close, and let the history of sleep wash over you. Tonight, the cabinet is open. The secrets are breathing, and the past is waiting to lead you into a deeper, more meaningful rest. Let us begin our journey into the blue hour, where the medicine of the earth meets the silence of the night. As the steam rises from the cup, carrying these ancient secrets into the quiet air, perhaps you feel a connection to this forgotten world. If these whispers of history are bringing you peace tonight, please consider subscribing to our sanctuary of sleep and leaving a like as a gentle sign of your presence. Your comments are like shared dreams in this quiet manner, and they help our garden of stories grow. The golden, honey-colored light of the late afternoon has finally surrendered its hold on the world. It has retreated slowly from the tops of the ancient, gnarled oaks and the soot-stained chimneys of the manor, leaving behind a sky that feels heavy, thick, and saturated with the coming of the night. Outside the heavy, cold stone walls of the Victorian estate, the vibrant, emerald greens of the English garden are slowly, almost imperceptibly, fading into muted shades of charcoal, slate, and deep, bruised indigo. This was the moment the Victorians called the twilight, a thin, fragile veil between the visible world of duty and the invisible world of dreams. Imagine standing at a tall, mahogany sash window, your hand resting on the cool, unyielding glass. You are looking out as the mist begins to rise from the damp, mossy earth of the surrounding moors. It rolls in like a silent, ghostly tide, swallowing the gravel paths, the low stone walls, and the iron gates. The world is losing its sharp edges, its harsh reality, and everything is becoming soft, blurred, and beautifully indistinct. The songbirds have long since fallen silent in the hedgerows, and the only sound that pierces the heavy air is the rhythmic, hollow, and distant chime of a village church bell marking the hour. 1, 2, 3, the sound ripples through the mist like a stone thrown into a still, dark pond. In this deepening indigo sky, the first gaslights on the distant town streets flicker like dying stars through the haze, but here, in the profound quiet of the countryside manor, the darkness is becoming absolute, and felt like a weight of velvet against the skin. As the shadows grow longer, they seem to stretch across the manicured lawns like long, dark fingers, climbing the ivy-covered brickwork and reaching for the very glass of your bedroom window. Inside the chamber, the transition from day to night is felt deep in the bones, a subtle chilling of the spirit. The air begins to cool rapidly, the temperature dropping as the old house exhales the warmth it gathered during the busy hours of the day. This deep blue evening was not just a simple change in the quality of light, it was a profound, psychological shift in the very spirit of the household. The bustling, frantic energy of the morning, the constant clatter of horse-drawn carriages on the cobblestones, the sharp, demanding voices of trade and social expectation, they have all been swallowed by this vast, quiet, and overwhelming blue. Every room in the manor seems to give a long, weary sigh, the heavy oak floorboards and massive, dark furniture settling into the stillness with soft, mysterious creaks that echo in the hallways. The thick, heavy velvet curtains are being drawn by silent, unseen hands, row after row, window after window, trapping the silence inside the room and shutting out the rest of the world. The world is no longer a place of action or labor, it is becoming a place of dreaming and slow, deliberate reflection. You can almost feel the physical weight of the night pressing against the window pane, urging you to turn away from the cold, unforgiving exterior and seek the flickering, golden sanctuary of the candlelight. This was the true beginning of the sanctuary, the precise moment when the external world ceased to exist, and the internal, private world of the Victorian lady began to breathe, slowly and deeply. The silver on the dressing table loses its glint and takes on a ghostly, pale sheen. Everything is retreating into the background, making space for the mind to expand. This blue light is not cold, it is a protective layer, a shield that guards the transition from the noise of society to the silence of the soul. The lady of the house watches the last sliver of light disappear behind the distant hills, knowing that for the next several hours, she is finally free from the gaze of the world. In the heart of the 19th century, rest was far more than a mere physical necessity for the weary, it was a moral duty, a highly refined art form that governed every single aspect of a lady's existence and well-being. The Victorians held a peculiar, almost spiritual obsession with the concept of beauty sleep, a deep-seated belief that the hours of rest taken before the stroke of midnight were charged with a special, almost magical restorative power. The medical journals of the era, along with the widely circulated ladies' guides and etiquette manuals, were filled with stern warnings and dire predictions. They claimed that to deprive oneself of this sacred window of sleep was to invite a slow, inevitable decay of both the physical complexion and the inner soul. To the Victorian mind, a tired, haggard face was not just a sign of simple fatigue, it was a sign of a disordered, undisciplined, and perhaps even an immoral life. They spoke in hushed, worried tones of nervous debility. The vapors and hysteria, mysterious and frightening conditions they believed could only be cured by an absolute, uncompromising surrender to the pillows and the deep, velvet darkness. A lady's beauty was seen as a direct, shimmering reflection of her inner tranquility and her moral standing within society, and thus, her bedroom became a private laboratory of restoration and spiritual healing. This was not the quick, heavy, and often interrupted sleep of our modern, frantic world, but a deliberate, cultured, and rhythmic descent into the ancient, quiet realm of somnus. Every single element of the bedchamber was meticulously engineered to support this relentless pursuit of perfect rest. The mattress, perhaps stuffed with sterilized horsehair, the finest dried moss, or the softest, hand-plucked swan down, was expected to be a cloud upon which the weary, overstimulated mind could float away from the heavy gravity of the earth. The pillows were arranged with a mathematical, almost architectural precision, designed to support the head and neck in a way that encouraged deep, unlabored, and perfectly silent breathing. There was a profound and widespread fear of the restless spirit, the idea that a mind left too active, too imaginative, or too worried in the evening would physically wither the delicate tissues of the body by the time the sun rose. Rest was also a powerful, undeniable sign of social status, a luxury afforded only to those who did not have to toil by the dim, flickering light of a tallow candle or the deafening roar of a factory machine. For the Victorian lady, her total, unwavering devotion to rest was her primary defense against the chaotic, loud, and increasingly industrial world that was growing like a monster just outside her heavy iron gates. She would spend hours, literally hours, preparing for this total disappearance into the fine, cool linen sheets, treating the simple act of going to bed as if it were a high religious ceremony, a royal audience, or a sacred pilgrimage. The absolute quiet, the crushing stillness, and the total, ink-black darkness were not just environmental conditions, they were the very medicines her spirit craved after a long day of rigid, exhausting social performance. As she lay there in the dim, dying light, the embers in the hearth casting a final, warm orange glow over the intricate lace of her many pillows, she was engaging in the ultimate act of self-preservation. The society outside her heavy mahogany door expected her to be eternally radiant, perfectly composed, and gracefully unyielding, and she knew with a quiet, steely certainty that the secret to that impossible grace lay here, in these hidden, silent, and blue-tinted hours of absolute, deep, and restorative repose. Beauty was the prize the world saw when she emerged in the morning, but peace, deep, undisturbed, and ancient peace, was the foundation she built for herself in the dark. The air inside a Victorian bedchamber was not the stagnant, artificial warmth we know in our modern homes. It was a living, breathing, and often biting cold that was maintained with a discipline that bordered on the religious. In the mid-19th century, a heated bedroom was viewed with deep, ancestral suspicion. It was seen not as a comfort, but as a dangerous indulgence, a breeding ground for foul humors, physical lethargy, and the much-feared clogging of the spirits. Medical authorities of the time, from the stern family doctor in his black frock coat to the widely read ladies' manuals found on every dressing table, preached the absolute gospel of the frigid room. They firmly believed that the human brain could only truly settle into a restorative, deep state of sleep if the air surrounding the sleeper was crisp, fresh, and entirely untainted by the heavy soot and coal smoke of the downstairs fires. Imagine stepping across the threshold of such a room as the clock strikes the evening hour. The temperature drops instantly, a sudden, sharp contrast to the velvet-lined warmth of the drawing rooms below. It is a cold that makes the tip of your nose tingle and causes your breath to appear in faint, ghostly plumes of white mist that vanish into the shadows. This cold was intentional, a sharp, clean knife of an environment designed to cut away the mental clutter and the overstimulation of a long Victorian day. The floorboards, dark, heavy, and polished to a mirror-like icy sheen, feel like frozen glass beneath the thin, silk soles of a lady's slippers. There is no hum of machinery, no distant vibration of modern technology, only the absolute, crushing weight of a pre-industrial silence that feels as thick as the curtains themselves. The room is a masterpiece of a controlled, almost sterile environment. The windows, often left slightly cracked even in the biting depths of a London winter, allow the damp, metallic, and earthy scent of the night air to circulate. This night air, which had been feared by previous generations as a source of deadly miasma, was now embraced by the late Victorians as a vital tonic for the frayed nerves of the upper classes. The heavy, floor-to-ceiling velvet curtains are not merely for decoration or a display of wealth. They are the primary, heavy defense against the chaotic world outside the manor walls. They are thick, weighted with layers of lining and history, specifically designed to absorb every stray vibration from the cobblestone streets and every unwanted flicker of light from the moon or the distant gas lamps. When those curtains are drawn shut, they create a void, a sensory vacuum where the only thing that exists is the sleeper, her breath, and her private thoughts. In the far corner of the room, the marble-topped washstand sits like a silent, stoic guardian of the night. Its porcelain basin holds water that, by 3 in the morning, may have already begun to skim with a thin, fragile layer of ice. The furniture in the room is massive, brooding, and made of dark, light-absorbing mahogany or walnut. These heavy pieces of wood seem to soak up the dim, flickering light of the single candle on the nightstand, casting long, distorted shadows that dance slowly across the ceiling. It is a room built for one singular, sacred purpose, to be a tomb for the day's worries and a sanctuary for the soul's recovery. Every fabric in the room, from the heavy, hand-woven wool rugs to the stiff, starched linen of the bed hangings, is chosen for its ability to dampen and stifle sound. Even the ticking of the ornate mantel clock is often muffled with a small, silk cloth or placed inside a glass dome, so that its relentless, rhythmic heartbeat does not intrude upon the fragile sanctity of the silence. This cold, this absolute, unwavering stillness, was the Victorians' version of a sensory deprivation chamber. They understood with a profound, instinctive wisdom that to truly descend into the mysterious depths of the subconscious, the body must first be stilled and preserved by the cold, and the ears must be starved of all external noise. It was a fortress of iron, wood, and ice. A place where the relentless gears of the British Empire simply stopped turning at the bedroom door. Here, in this frozen, silent theater, the stage was finally set for the mind to wander wherever it willed, far away from the prying eyes and the heavy expectations of the Victorian world. The lady of the house would climb into her high, cold bed, pulling the heavy quilts up to her chin, finding a strange, profound comfort in the icy air that guarded her dreams like a silent sentinel. For a Victorian lady, the journey from the crowded, brightly lit drawing room to the absolute solitude of her bedroom was far more than a simple walk down a hallway. It was a slow, ritualistic, and often painful shedding of a public persona that was as rigid, as unyielding, and as suffocating as the whalebone corset beneath her gown. All day, from the moment she broke her fast until the final guest departed after tea, she had been a living ornament of British society. She was a symbol of her husband's immense wealth, a guardian of her family's strict morality, and a silent, smiling pillar of Victorian virtue. Every smile she gave was measured, every word she spoke was weighed for its potential social impact, and every single inch of her body was encased in layers of fabric that dictated her every breath and movement. In the eyes of the world, she was not a person, she was a presence, a carefully maintained image of impossible perfection. But as she finally closes her heavy, mahogany bedroom door and turns the ornate brass key in the lock, that public image begins to dissolve like mist in the flickering candlelight. The transition into her private self starts with her hands, which may be trembling slightly as she begins to unpin the elaborate, heavy architecture of her hat. Or perhaps she reaches for the heavy, gemstone-encrusted jewelry that has weighed down her neck, her ears, and her wrists all evening, acting more like decorative shackles than ornaments of beauty. As each piece is laid onto the velvet-lined tray, you can hear the soft, musical, and hollow clink of her public duties being set aside one by one. These are not just jewels, they are the armor of her rank, and their removal is the first step toward her true identity. Then comes the labor-intensive, almost archaeological process of the unlacing. This is the most profound physical and emotional transformation of her entire day. As the many, heavy layers of silk, lace, and wool are stripped away, the massive skirts that have made her move like a slow-moving, dignified ship are discarded. They pile up on the cold floorboards like the discarded skin of a serpent, leaving her smaller, lighter, and more vulnerable in the dim light. And then, the corset is reached. As the tight laces are finally loosened by her own fingers or those of a trusted maid, there is a long, shuddering, and deep intake of breath. Her ribs, which have been compressed all day to achieve the ideal Victorian silhouette, finally begin to expand to their natural state. It is a moment of raw, physical liberation, a return to her natural form that she is only permitted to experience in the total secrecy of the dark. She moves now with a newfound, almost ghostly lightness, her body freed from the cage of whalebone and tempered steel stays. She reaches for her nightgown, a vast, flowing, and ethereal garment of the finest white cotton or perhaps a heavy silk that hides her form while giving her skin the freedom to breathe. Her hair, which has been coiled, braided, and pinned into a complex, unmoving structure all day, is finally let down at last. It falls over her shoulders like a dark, shimmering, and heavy veil, reaching down toward her waist in waves of silent relief. With every slow, rhythmic stroke of the silver-backed brush, she is combing away the expectations, the judgments, and the exhaustion of the Victorian world. The hairbrush moves through her tresses with a soft, whispering sound, a repetitive melody that signals the end of her performance. In a silvered mirror, she no longer sees the lady of the manor, she sees only the woman. She sees the deep fatigue etched into the corners of her eyes, the quiet strength in the set of her jaw, and the dreams that she has had to suppress and bury since the very moment of breakfast. In this private, indigo-tinted space, she is finally allowed to be tired. She is allowed to be sad, she is allowed to be pensive, or she is allowed to be absolutely nothing at all. The public role she played was a high-stakes performance, a mask of porcelain and lace, but this quiet, breathing self, is the absolute truth of her existence. This transition is the most essential part of her nightly ritual, for she knows that she cannot drink the tonics of sleep or find true rest until she has first washed away the invisible stains of society from her spirit. She stands by the fire for a moment, her nightgown flowing around her like a soft, white cloud in the shadows, listening to the silence of the house. No one is watching her now. No one is judging the curve of her spine or the tone of her voice. She is free within the four walls of her cold, quiet room. Night was the only time she truly belonged to herself, and as the candle flickers low, she is finally, at last, ready to face the mysteries of the night as her true, unburdened self. She moves across the cold, polished expanse of the bedchamber floor, her nightgown trailing behind her like a soft, white mist in the deepening indigo shadows. Her destination is a quiet, unassuming corner of the room, far from the grand mahogany bed and the flickering heat of the hearth. There, resting against the intricate, floral patterns of the wallpaper, stands a small, dark, and heavy wooden cabinet. It is an object of exquisite, understated craftsmanship, made of dark, aged oak that seems to have absorbed the silence of this house for generations. This is her secret sanctuary, her private cabinet of curiosities, a hidden laboratory where the chaotic world of Victorian society is firmly shut out. To the casual observer, it might look like a simple piece of furniture, a place for linens or stationery, but to her, it is a portal to the ancient, botanical wisdom of the earth. She pauses before it, her silhouette bathed in the faint, silvery light of the moon filtering through the heavy velvet curtains. She reaches for a small, delicate silver key that hangs from a thin silk ribbon around her neck, tucked safely beneath the lace collar of her gown. The metal of the key is cold, startlingly cold against her thumb as she lifts it, a sharp reminder of the physical reality of the night. She leans closer, and the faint, sweet scent of beeswax polish on the wood greets her. With a slow, deliberate movement, she inserts the silver key into the ornate, brass-lined keyhole. It fits perfectly, a marriage of metal and mechanism that has been repeated every night for years. She pauses for a heartbeat, listening to the profound stillness of the manor. No footsteps in the hall. No rustle of wind in the chimney. Only the steady, rhythmic pulse of her own heart. Then, she turns the key. There is a faint, mechanical click, a sharp, metallic sound that feels amplified in the absolute silence of the room. It is the sound of a boundary being crossed, the sound of a secret being unlocked. She places her hand on the heavy, carved door of the cabinet, feeling the grain of the oak beneath her fingertips. It feels ancient, solid, and grounded. She pulls the door toward her, and it moves with a slow, heavy grace, giving a long, low, and melodic creak that sounds like a weary sigh from the past. As the door swings wide, the interior of the cabinet is revealed, a hidden world of glass, shadows, and dried life. The first thing that reaches out to her is not a sound, but a scent. It is a deep, complex, and intoxicating bouquet that seems to hang in the air like a physical presence. It is the concentrated memory of 1,000 summer gardens, all preserved in the cool, dark sanctuary of this wooden box. It is earthy, floral, slightly sharp, and deeply, deeply comforting. It is the smell of the earth's own medicine, waiting patiently in the dark to be awakened. Inside the cabinet, the organization is meticulous, a reflection of her inner need for order in an unpredictable world. Rows of small, hand-blown glass vials and heavy apothecary jars stand like silent, amber-colored sentinels on the narrow wooden shelves. Some of the jars are wrapped in fine, yellowing lace to protect their precious contents from any stray spark of light. Others bear small, handwritten labels in a delicate, fading copperplate script, names of plants and roots that sound like ancient incantations. The glass of the bottles catches the faint light of the single candle on her nightstand, reflecting tiny, dancing points of amber and emerald back at her. This cabinet was more than just a collection of herbs, it was her autonomy. In an era where a woman's health was often managed by stern men with leeches and harsh chemicals, this cabinet represented her own knowledge, her own connection to the healing rhythms of nature. She looks at the jars, and she sees the hours she spent in the gardens during the golden afternoons of July, the days she spent drying leaves in the attic, and the quiet mornings she spent grinding seeds into powder. Every jar is a story, a memory of the sun, and a promise of sleep. She reaches out, her hand hovering over the various vessels. She does not rush. The night is long, and the ritual requires a slow, meditative pace. She feels the cool air circulating inside the cabinet, carrying the dusty, papery scent of dried botanicals. It is a dry, clean smell, the smell of life that has been stilled and concentrated into its most potent form. There are bundles of dried stalks tied with garden twine, small wooden boxes filled with seeds, and heavy stone mortars that have seen decades of use. The cabinet is a cathedral of quietude. As she stands there, the heavy door fully open, she feels the transformation beginning. The rigid expectations of the Victorian lady are falling away, replaced by the ancient role of the healer, the alchemist, the seeker of rest. She is no longer just a woman in a manor, she is a guardian of the night's peace. The darkness inside the cabinet is not frightening, it is a fertile, healing darkness, a darkness that holds the keys to the world of dreams. She breathes in deeply, letting the layered scents of the cabinet fill her lungs and still her mind. The transition is almost complete. The world of the day is now a distant memory, a faint echo beyond the heavy curtains. Here, at the open door of her herbal sanctuary, she is standing on the threshold of sleep. The wood of the cabinet seems to radiate a quiet, steady energy, a grounding force that anchors her to the present moment. Every jar she touches, every label she reads, brings her one step closer to the silence she craves. The cabinet is open, the secrets are breathing, and the long journey into the deep, herbal night is finally ready to begin. She stands before the open cabinet, her fingers hovering like a soft prayer over the glass jars. The air is now thick with the scent of dried summers and forgotten fields. It is time to call upon the guardians of the night, the botanical spirits that will lead her into the deep, silent waters of sleep. One by one, she will invite them out of their amber-colored prisons and into the warmth of the evening. Her hand moves first to a jar that seems to hold the very essence of a July afternoon. Lavender. As the lid is slowly unscrewed, a dry, floral whisper escapes into the cold room. This is the ultimate symbol of Victorian calm, the mother of herbs that guarded every linen closet and every bedside table in the empire. She takes a small handful of the tiny, purple buds, and the sound is unmistakable, a soft, papery crackle as they shift against one another. Lavender, for the racing mind that cannot find its anchor. Lavender, for the heart that is weary from the noise of the drawing room. The scent is sharp yet sweet, a medicinal floral that immediately signals the nervous system to lower its guard. It is the fragrance of safety, the smell of clean sheets and sun-drenched gardens. In the 19th century, lavender was believed to comfort the brain and dispel the dark clouds of melancholy that often haunted the Victorian lady. She rolls the tiny buds between her thumb and forefinger, releasing a fresh wave of perfume that seems to soften the very shadows in the corner of the room. Lavender does not force sleep, it creates a sanctuary where sleep feels invited, a gentle hand on a fevered brow, a quiet promise that the day's worries are finally over. 1, 2, 3, she counts the buds as they fall back into the jar, each one a tiny, scented weight of tranquility. But as the night deepens, sometimes a more powerful force is required, a deeper, more grounded magic. Her hand moves to a heavier jar, one that feels cold and solid in her palm. Valerian root. This is not a delicate flower of the sun, but a dark, potent power from beneath the heavy earth. As she opens the jar, the scent is startling, sharp, musky, and intensely organic. It smells of damp soil, of ancient roots, and of the profound mystery of the underground. This was the nature's sedative of the Victorian era, a root so powerful it was whispered to be able to still even the most violent storms of anxiety and pull the most restless, tortured spirit down into a deep, dreamless, and absolute slumber. She looks at the gnarled, dried fragments of the root. They are rough and wooden to the touch. There is nothing fragile about valerian. It is the anchor that holds the soul steady when the winds of nervous exhaustion begin to blow. In the language of the apothecary, valerian was the stiller of the heart. It works slowly, moving through the blood like a quiet, dark river, turning off the lights of the mind one by one until only the darkness remains. Valerian, for the heavy eyelids that refuse to close. Valerian, for the deep, deep rest that feels like falling into a bed of soft moss. She sets the jar down with a muffled thud on the wooden shelf, the weight of its potential filling the room with a sense of earthy security. To balance the intensity of the root, she reaches for the golden light of the chamomile. These tiny, dried, daisy-like flowers look like fallen suns trapped inside the glass. As she tilts the jar, the flowers move with a sound like a soft, dry whisper, a sound of autumn leaves dancing on a stone path. Chamomile is the gentle, maternal touch of the herbal cabinet, the herb of gentle sleep. Its scent is nostalgic and sweet, reminiscent of sun-dried hay and the faint tartness of a wild apple. In the Victorian world, chamomile was the primary remedy for the overexcited spirit. It was used to soothe the restless child and the lady whose nerves had been frayed by the sharp edges of social etiquette. It is a humble flower, yet it possesses a quiet, steady strength. It does not demand sleep, it prepares the body for it by softening the spirit and quieting the breath. As she breathes in its golden perfume, she feels the tension in her shoulders begin to dissolve. Chamomile, for the softening of the harsh world. Chamomile, for the quiet, rhythmic breath. It is like a kind, familiar voice telling her that everything is as it should be, and that the night is a place of healing, not fear. The dry flowers feel like feathers against her skin, light and airy, promising a sleep that is as natural as the setting sun. Rose petals, for the lonely hours when the house is too quiet. Rose petals, for the silent griefs and the unspoken longings that only dare to emerge in the dark of the bedroom. They provide the softness, the beauty, and the warmth that the rigid, cold Victorian society so often denied her during the daylight hours. To the Victorian apothecary, the rose was a cordial, something that warmed the heart and protected the soul from the chills of the spirit. They add a layer of luxury to the night, a reminder that rest is not just a biological function, but a beautiful, sensory experience. She stands there, surrounded by the textures and the smells of her botanical guardians. The dry, rustling sound of the lavender. The heavy, musk-scented silence of the valerian. The sweet, hay-like whisper of the chamomile. And the silken, floral grace of the rose. Lavender, valerian, chamomile, and rose. They are her four companions in the deepening darkness. Each one is a specific promise, a botanical whisper that the world of the day is far, far away, and that the night is hers to command. The pacing of her heart begins to match the slow, repetitive movement of her hands as she prepares the mixture. She is no longer just a woman in a cold manner, she is an alchemist of peace. One by one, the herbs have spoken their names. One by one, they have offered their secrets. And as the scents mingle in the air, creating a complex tapestry of calm, the final transition begins. The cabinet has given its treasures, and the journey into the deep, herbal night is now moving from the wood of the cabinet to the warmth of the hearth. Lavender for the mind. Valerian for the body. Chamomile for the spirit, and rose for the heart. The ritual of the night is in full bloom. Now, she begins the most delicate part of her nightly journey, the sensory conversation between her hands and the earth's dried treasures. In the absolute stillness of the Victorian bedchamber, every sensation is amplified, every touch is significant, and every sound is a whisper from the past. She reaches out her hand, her fingers pale and slender in the flickering candlelight, and she touches the first of the dried botanicals. It is the texture of time itself. She runs her fingertips over the dried lavender buds, feeling their small, hard, and grain-like bodies. They are cool to the touch, yet they hold a hidden warmth of the summer sun. She picks up a small handful, and as they shift in her palm, you can hear it. The sound of dried leaves. A soft, papery, and rhythmic crackle that sounds like the very footsteps of silence. It is a dry sound, a clean sound, a sound that tells the mind to stop racing and start listening. She lets the lavender fall slowly, grain by grain, back into the ceramic bowl. Crackle, whisper, silence. Crackle, whisper, silence. The texture is rough yet soothing, 1,000 tiny points of contact against her skin, each one releasing a microscopic burst of calm. Then comes the smell. Oh, the smell of the lavender is not a single note, but a symphony of rest. As she crushes a few buds between her thumb and forefinger, the scent blooms in the cold air. It is floral, yes, but underneath there is a sharp, clean, and woody undertone that cuts through the heaviness of the room. It is the smell of safety. It is the smell of a home that is finally quiet. She breathes it in, deeply, slowly, letting the fragrance travel through her senses like a cool, purple wave. The smell of lavender, the sound of the dry buds, the rough texture against her skin. Repetition. Peace. Repetition. Peace. Her hand moves to the valerian root, and the sensory experience shifts. The texture here is different. It is dense, gnarled, and wooden. It feels like holding a piece of the ancient forest floor in her hand. It is heavy, grounded, and solid. As she moves the dried roots, the sound is deeper, a low, hollow clink as they hit the sides of the bowl. It is not a whisper like the lavender, it is a statement of strength. The smell of the valerian is earthy, musky, and profoundly organic. It smells of the deep, dark places where roots grow, far away from the light of the sun. It is the scent of the underground, the scent of the foundation, the scent of a sleep so deep that no dream can reach it. She feels the ridges of the root with her thumb, over and over, tracing the lines of its growth. Rough, heavy, earthy. Rough, heavy, earthy. Now, she reaches for the chamomile flowers. These are the lightest of all. They feel like tiny, dried feathers against her palm, so weightless they almost seem to float. When she moves them, the sound is a delicate, airy hiss, like the sound of a distant summer wind through dry grass. It is the softest sound in the room, a sound that barely exists, yet it fills the silence with a golden comfort. The texture is crumbly, fragile, and soft. If she presses too hard, they turn into a fine, golden dust. She smells the chamomile, and it is like breathing in a cup of sunshine and honey. It is a sweet, hay-like fragrance, with a hint of dried apple skin. It is a gentle smell, a kind smell, a smell that reminds her of childhood and the warmth of a mother's hand. Fragile texture, airy sound, sweet smell. Fragile texture, airy sound, sweet smell. Everything is slowing down now. Her movements are becoming a dance of repetition. She picks up the herbs, she smells them, she listens to their dry voices, and she lays them down. Again. And again. Finally, she touches the rose petals. These are the most luxurious of textures. Even in their dried state, they feel like thin, brittle silk. They are smooth, almost waxy, and they slide against each other with a soft, shushing sound. Shh, shh, shh. It is the sound of a secret being whispered in the dark. The smell of the roses is deep, nostalgic, and intoxicating. It is a concentrated sweetness, a floral heart that beats with the memory of beauty. It is a scent that comforts the spirit and warms the cold air of the bedroom. Silken texture, whispering sound, nostalgic smell. Silken texture, whispering sound, nostalgic smell. She stands there, her hands now covered in the fine, scented dust of the earth. The sensory storytelling is complete, but the induction continues. She listens to the silence between the sounds. She feels the coolness of the air against her warmed fingertips. She breathes in the complex, layered bouquet of the four guardians. The dry, papery crackle of the lavender. The heavy, earthy musk of the valerian. The light, airy hiss of the chamomile. And the soft, silken whisper of the rose. Repetition is the key to the night. The texture of the leaves, the smell of the garden, the sound of the harvest. Texture, smell, sound. Texture, smell, sound. Her mind is no longer thinking of the day's duties, or the corset she wore, or the guests she entertained. Her mind is only here, in this small, sensory circle of peace. The dry, scratching sound of the herbs being gathered into a bundle is the only clock she follows now. It is a slow, hypnotic rhythm, a pulse that matches the steady beat of her own heart. She looks at her hands, and she sees the story of the earth written in the fragments of the leaves. The rough, the smooth, the heavy, the light. Every sensation is a step further away from the world of men and a step closer to the world of dreams. The smell is now a part of her, lingering on her skin, clinging to her nightgown. The sound of the dried leaves is the last thing she hears before the fire begins to fade. The texture of the night is soft. The smell of the night is herbal. The sound of the night is the sound of the dried leaves, telling her, over and over, that it is time to sleep. Time to let go. Time to drift into the indigo depths. One last touch of the petals. One last breath of the lavender. One last listen to the dry, quiet music of the cabinet. Everything is ready. The sensory bridge is built, and the long, herbal night is waiting to carry her away. The world of the Victorian lady was one of rigid structures, of ironclad rules, and of a society that demanded she be as static and perfect as a marble statue. But inside her private chambers, within the silent walls of her dressing room, there existed a different kind of world, a world of fluid boundaries and ancient whispers. This was the realm of Victorian herbal knowledge, a fascinating, complex, and often contradictory tapestry woven from the threads of emerging modern science and the deep, dark roots of ancestral folklore. In the mid-19th century, the Great Exhibition had already showcased the marvels of the Industrial Age, and the cold, analytical eye of chemistry was beginning to deconstruct the natural world. Yet, for the woman standing by her herbal cabinet, the old ways were not dead. They were breathing, pulsing, and hiding in the very scents of the leaves she held in her hands. This knowledge was a peculiar hybrid, a bridge between the laboratory and the kitchen hearth. On one hand, she might possess a copy of the latest botanical guide, its pages filled with the Latin names of plants and the precise chemical classifications of their active properties. She understood, perhaps better than the men of her time gave her credit for, the science of the plant. She knew that certain alkaloids in the valerian root acted directly upon the nervous system, slowing the frantic electrical impulses of a stressed brain. She understood the chemistry of the infusion, how the temperature of the water could either draw out the healing oils of the peppermint or destroy the fragile essence of the rose. This was her logic, her intellect, her way of bringing the order of the modern world into the chaos of her own physical exhaustion. But, as the candlelight flickers and the shadows grow long against the heavy velvet drapes, the folklore begins to rise like mist from the moors. You see, the Victorian mind was a haunted mind. Even as they built steam engines and telegraph lines, they remained deeply tethered to the superstitions of their ancestors. To the Victorian lady, a herb was never just a chemical compound, it was a living entity with a history, a spirit, and a set of traditional rules that science could not explain. This was the folklore mix, the belief that a plant's power was dictated not just by its molecules, but by the time of day it was harvested, the direction of the wind when it was dried, and the intent of the person who prepared it. She would remember the whispers of the village healers, the wise women who lived on the edges of the estates, women who spoke of the doctrine of signatures. This was the ancient belief that a plant's physical appearance was a divine clue to its medicinal use. Because the walnut looked like a human brain, it was thought to cure headaches. Because the yellow of the dandelion resembled bile, it was used to treat the liver. To the modern scientist, this was mere superstition, but to the Victorian lady, it was a comforting, symbolic language that connected her body to the physical landscape of the earth. She was caught in the middle of a great tug-of-war, one foot in the rational light of the 1800s, and the other in the dark, enchanted forests of the Middle Ages. This mixture created a unique atmosphere of mystery within the apothecary's craft. When she brewed her nightly tonic, she was performing a ritual that was half experiment and half incantation. She might measure her tinctures with the precision of a chemist, but she would stir the liquid in a clockwise direction with the sun to ensure its efficacy. She would respect the science of the dosage, but she would also believe that the lavender was more potent because it had been gathered under a waxing moon. This was not a conflict of interest for her, it was a survival strategy. In a world that was becoming increasingly cold and mechanical, the folklore provided the soul that the science lacked. It made her healing personal, intimate, and deeply spiritual. But we must also look at the darker side of this science plus folklore mix. The Victorian era was a time of great experimentation, and the line between a remedy and a poison was often as thin as a single drop of liquid. This was the apothecary's risk, the silent danger that sat upon every elegant nightstand. Because the knowledge was a mix of tradition and trial and error, there were risks that modern medicine would find horrifying. Folklore might suggest that a certain root could bring the sleep of the just, but the science, if misunderstood, could lead to the sleep of the grave. There was a subtle, dark, and lingering mystery within these tonics. For all their beauty and the calming scent of flowers, some of these elixirs were far more than they appeared to be. The obsession with total, absolute rest sometimes led to the use of ingredients that were slightly, and then profoundly, addictive. While the chamomile was gentle and the rose was sweet, some tonics were reinforced with tinctures of the poppy or concentrated mandrake, substances that held a darker, tighter grip on the human mind. These were the sleep bringers that walked a very fine line between comfort and a quiet, permanent dependence. The Victorian lady knew, or perhaps she only sensed in the quietest corners of her heart, that her nightly escape had a price. The science told her it was a sedative that would cure her insomnia, but the folklore warned her of the vivid, strange dreams and the heavy spirit that followed the use of such potent brews. She was a master of herbal chemistry, yes, but she was also a gambler with her own consciousness. Every night as she measured the liquids, the glass dropper clinking against the rim of the vial, she was making a choice. 1 drop for peace, 2 drops for silence, 3 drops for a sleep that felt like a temporary, indigo death. The folklore gave these risks a name. They called it paying the tithe to the night. They believed that if you took too much from the kingdom of sleep, the kingdom would eventually take something back from you. This is why her knowledge was so vital, and why she studied her books with such intensity. She had to know exactly where the science ended and the danger began. She had to navigate the mix with the steady hand of a surgeon and the intuition of a witch. Listen to the absolute silence of the room now, as the fire begins to soften into glowing embers. The knowledge she possesses is a heavy, beautiful burden. It is the wisdom of the earth, filtered through the lens of a changing century. The lavender, the valerian, the rose, they are all part of this complex equation. Science gives her the recipe, but folklore gives her the ritual. Science tells her how, but folklore tells her why. And as she stands there, her shadow stretching long and thin against the wall, she is the ultimate bridge between the two. She is the Victorian apothecary, the keeper of the science, the protector of the folklore, and the mistress of the night's most potent and most dangerous secrets. In the vast, structured world of the 19th century, where universities were fortresses of men and medical science was a cold, clinical language of Latin and steel, there existed an underground river of knowledge. This was a quiet, domestic science, a profound understanding of the natural world that was passed not through academic halls, but through the soft whispers of women in moonlit gardens and the rhythmic scratching of pens in private diaries. The Victorian lady's mastery of the herbal cabinet was not a sudden discovery, it was a long, slow journey, a pilgrimage of learning that began in the earliest days of her childhood and continued until her hair turned as white as the linens she slept upon. Imagine a young girl, sitting on a low stool in a sun-drenched kitchen garden, her eyes fixed on her mother's hands. This was the first classroom. She watched as her mother moved with a practiced, instinctive ease among the rows of rosemary, sage, and lavender. She learned that the timing of the harvest was as important as the plant itself. She learned that a leaf picked in the dew of the morning held a different spirit than one gathered in the heat of the afternoon sun. This was the maternal legacy, a living genealogy of health that stretched back through centuries of grandmothers, aunts, and sisters. It was a knowledge rooted in touch, in the smell of crushed stalks, and in the intuitive understanding of the body's silent needs. As she grew older, this oral tradition was reinforced by the written word, but these were not the cold, printed textbooks of the London surgeons. No. These were the stillroom books, precious, leather-bound manuscripts that were the true Bibles of the Victorian household. Inside these pages, the ink was often faded, stained with the oils of peppermint or the juice of elderberries. They were filled with recipes for syrup of poppies for a restless babe, rosewater wash for a weary face, and the all-important nightly infusions for the nervous soul. Every entry was a testament to a woman's observation. Add a pinch more valerian if the heart is heavy, one note might say, or stir 9 times to the right to keep the dreams sweet. She would spend long, quiet afternoons in the Manor's library, or tucked away in her own dressing room, studying these texts with the intensity of a scholar. She was learning to be an architect of peace, a chemist of the heart. She was learning how to balance the potent alkaloids of the roots with the gentle essential oils of the flowers. She was learning the science of the hearth, a science that recognized that a human being is not just a collection of organs, but a soul that needs to be comforted. These books were her secret power, a quiet rebellion against a world that told her she was incapable of complex thought. With every page she turned, she was reclaiming her autonomy over her own health and the health of those she loved. But her education did not stop at the manor gates. There was a third teacher in this journey, the healers and wise women who lived on the fringes of society. These were the women who lived in the small cottages at the edge of the woods, women who knew the secrets of the hedgerows and the hidden properties of the weeds that the gardeners tried to pull. The Victorian lady, despite her high social standing, would often seek out these women in secret. She would listen as they spoke of the earth's pulse, the way the mandrake screamed when pulled from the ground, or the way the mugwort could open the third eye in sleep. From these healers, she learned the folklore of the soil, the deep, dark magic that science could not explain but that experience proved to be true. She learned that a root was never just a root, it was a concentrated piece of the earth's own memory. She learned to respect the darkness, to understand that the night had its own rules and its own medicine. These healers taught her to trust her intuition, to listen to the whisper of the leaves before she reached for the vial. It was a raw, primal knowledge, a connection to the ancient world that had been mostly forgotten in the smoke and noise of the Industrial Revolution. This triple education, from the mother's hands, the leather-bound books, and the village healers, created a woman who was a master of her environment. She was not officially a doctor, she bore no titles and received no public honors, but her knowledge was arguably more profound than many of the professionals of her day. She knew her cabinet like a captain knows his ship. She knew every grain, every drop, and every scent. She knew the risk of the poppy and the comfort of the rose. She was a silent apothecary, a guardian of the night's most potent secrets. As we watch her now, standing by her candle, she is the culmination of all these teachers. She is the mother, the scholar, and the healer all at once. The quietness of her learning is what gave it its strength. It was a knowledge that didn't need to shout to be powerful. It was a knowledge that worked in the dark, in the silence, and in the deep, rhythmic breathing of a sleeping house. Every drop of the tonic she prepares tonight is a drop of history, a drop of wisdom, and a drop of the feminine spirit that refused to be silenced. She picks up her pen to make a final note in her own book, adding her voice to the chorus of women who came before her. The lavender was particularly sweet this year, she writes. Good for the restless mind of a cold winter's eve. The cycle of learning continues. The books are closed, the teachers are silent, but the knowledge is alive, breathing in the air of the room, and waiting to lead her into the indigo deep of her own dreams. This is the legacy of the Victorian herbalist, a legacy of quiet power, of deep connection, and of the eternal pursuit of a peaceful, healing rest. The history books of the 19th century are filled with the names of famous men, surgeons in blood-stained aprons, chemists in sterile laboratories, and professors behind heavy oak podiums. But if you were to walk through the quiet, gaslit corridors of a Victorian manor and enter the lady's private chamber, you would find a different kind of expert. She held no university degree. She was not allowed to sign a medical prescription or wear the formal robes of a physician. She was not officially a doctor, and yet, within the four walls of her home, she was a master of a science that was as deep as the ocean and as ancient as the soil. Her knowledge was not a cold, clinical accumulation of facts, it was a living, breathing, and deeply intuitive understanding of the fragile boundary between life, health, and the mysterious world of sleep. Imagine her standing by her dressing table, her eyes reflecting the soft, orange glow of the dying fire. She does not see a collection of random plants in her cabinet, she sees a complex, biological orchestra. While the official doctors of the era were often obsessed with harsh, invasive treatments, mercury, leeches, and violent purgatives, the lady of the house practiced a much more sophisticated medicine of the soul. She understood that a human being was not just a machine to be fixed with a wrench, but a delicate tapestry of nerves, emotions, and ancestral memories. Her doctoring was an act of quiet observation, a constant, silent study of the rise and fall of a fever, the specific rhythm of a restless breath, and the subtle changes in the color of a loved one's skin under the moonlight. She was a domestic chemist in the truest sense of the word. She knew, with a certainty that many professional doctors lacked, that the body and the mind were inseparable. When she reached for the lavender or the valerian, she wasn't just treating insomnia, she was treating the nervous exhaustion of a life lived under constant, suffocating social pressure. She understood the dosage of the spirit. She knew that a single drop too many of a certain tincture could turn a healing dream into a dangerous delirium. Her hands, as they measured the clear, herbal liquids into a porcelain cup, moved with the steady, unwavering precision of a surgeon, but her heart remained that of a healer. This was a knowledge born out of necessity, out of love, and out of a profound connection to the earth that the industrial world was trying so hard to forget. To the outside world, she was merely managing her household, but in reality, she was managing a sophisticated apothecary. She was the one the servants came to when their joints ached from the damp English winters. She was the one who sat through the long, indigo hours of the night with a sick child, her mind constantly calculating the strengths of her infusions. She was a scholar of the hearth, a woman who had memorized the pharmacopoeia of the garden by heart. She knew which roots needed to be boiled in spring water and which leaves needed to be infused in cold oil. She knew the secret language of the simple, the ancient term for a single medicinal herb used alone. And she knew that sometimes, the most powerful medicine was not a drug at all, but the ritual, the scent, and the quiet presence of someone who truly understood. But there was also a heavy, silent burden to this unofficial knowledge. Because she was not a doctor, her failures were hers alone to carry, and her successes were often ignored by history. She had to be more careful, more precise, and more knowledgeable than any man with a title, because her laboratory was her family. She was the guardian of the night, the gatekeeper between the exhaustion of the day and the sanctuary of rest. She lived in a world that told her she was fragile and incapable of science, while she was simultaneously making life and death decisions based on her botanical expertise. This was the Victorian paradox: the woman who was a scientist in the dark, an alchemist in a lace nightgown. As she stands there now, the silver spoon clinking softly against the glass vial, feel the weight of her deep, quiet authority. She is not guessing. She is not experimenting blindly. She is recalling decades of observation, years of study, and generations of feminine wisdom. She is the doctor of the home, the uncelebrated pioneer of holistic health. Her knowledge was a form of resistance, a way of saying that the human body belongs to the earth, not to the cold, industrial machines of the city. Every herb she touches is a tool in her arsenal, every scent is a part of her diagnosis. She is a mistress of the microscopic, understanding how the tiny, invisible oils of a chamomile flower can expand the lungs and quiet the racing pulse. She is a custodian of the subconscious, knowing which tonics will bring a dreamless, heavy sleep and which will allow the mind to wander through the beautiful, floral landscapes of the imagination. She was not officially a doctor, but in the deepest, most honest sense of the word, she was the only one who truly knew the cure for the Victorian night. She was the one who could turn a cold, dark bedroom into a warm, healing sanctuary. Listen to the silence, the absolute, velvety silence of her room. The world of titles and degrees is far away now. Here, in the flickering light, there is only the healer and the medicine. Her knowledge is her power, her cabinet is her kingdom, and the sleep she is about to invite is her greatest success. She is deeply, profoundly knowledgeable, a silent architect of the human spirit. As the tonic is finally ready, and the steam rises in a gentle, herbal ribbon toward the ceiling, we recognize her for what she truly was, the silent, brilliant, and essential heartbeat of 19th century wellness. The official doctors may have written the books, but it was the women in the shadows who truly understood how to bring the world to rest. The lady of the house sits upon her low, velvet stool, her back straight but her shoulders finally beginning to surrender their tension. Before her, resting on a small, sturdy wooden table near the hearth, is her most trusted instrument of transformation, the mortar and pestle. It is a heavy, solid piece of white Carrara marble, aged and smooth from years of nightly use. It feels cool, almost icy against her palms as she reaches out to touch it, a stark contrast to the growing warmth of the fire beside her. She begins the first step of her alchemy, the sacred act of breaking down the dried botanicals into a potent, aromatic dust. She reaches into her wooden cabinet and brings forth the dried lavender buds, the gnarled pieces of valerian root, and the fragile chamomile flowers. One by one, she places them into the deep, curved hollow of the marble bowl. The sound of the dried herbs hitting the stone is a soft, papery thud, a hollow whisper that signals the start of the ritual. She takes the heavy pestle in her right hand, feeling its weight, its balance, and its purpose. And then, the grinding begins. Listen to the sound in the absolute silence of the room. A rhythmic, low, and incredibly earthy scrape of stone against stone. Scrape and circle. Scrape and circle. She is not rushing this process. In the Victorian world, haste was the enemy of healing. She moves the pestle in a slow, hypnotic, clockwise direction, following the path of the sun as it travels across the sky. As the heavy stone moves, the cell walls of the dried herbs begin to fracture and break, and suddenly, the room is filled with a fresh, concentrated explosion of fragrance. The sharp, floral punch of the lavender mixes with the deep, musky, soil scent of the valerian root. It is a smell that feels ancient, wise, and profoundly grounding. She watches the textures change before her eyes, the purple buds and brown roots turning into a fine, multicolored powder that clings to the sides of the white marble. This is the first awakening of the medicine, the moment where the spirit of the plant is released from its dry, wintry sleep. The friction of the stone creates a tiny, subtle bit of heat, a precursor to the fire that is soon to follow. Scrape and circle. Scrape and circle. The sound is a repetitive melody that tells her brain to stop its frantic thinking and start feeling the rhythm of the night. Her hand moves with a steady, unwavering pace, a pulse that matches the slow, calm beating of her own heart. She feels the grit of the herbs beneath the pestle, the resistance of the roots, and then the eventual smoothness as they succumb to her will. This is a physical meditation, a way of grinding away the day's worries, the social expectations, and the rigid constraints of her life until they are nothing but dust. She pauses for a moment, lifting the pestle to inspect the mixture. The powder is uniform, fine, and heavy with oils. The scent is now so thick in the air that she can almost taste the summer fields on her tongue. She uses a small, silver spoon to scrape the sides of the mortar, making sure not a single grain of the precious dust is wasted. The sound of the silver against the marble is a high, delicate ping, a bright note in the low, earthy symphony of the grinding. Scries and fall. Scries and fall. The ritual of the mortar and pestle is her way of connecting with the raw power of the earth. It is a labor of love, a labor of peace. And as the final turn of the pestle is completed, the first stage of her alchemy is finished, and the ground herbs lie waiting, silent and potent, in their marble cradle. With the herbs now reduced to a fragrant dust, she turns her attention to the second element of her nightly alchemy, the water. In the Victorian kitchen, water was often boiled with a violent, roaring intensity for tea or laundry, but here, in the sanctuary of the bedroom, the water must be treated with a different kind of respect. She reaches for a small, polished brass kettle that has been resting on a trivet near the edge of the hearth. It is a beautiful, delicate object, its surface reflecting the dancing orange flames of the fire. She fills it with pure, cold spring water, and places it carefully over a small, controlled bed of glowing embers. Heating the water slowly is a cardinal rule of the Victorian herbalist. They believed that a sudden, violent boil would scald the spirit of the herbs, destroying the fragile, volatile oils that bring true rest to the soul. She watches the kettle with a patient, focused gaze, her eyes unmoving in the flickering light. For several long minutes, nothing seems to happen, the water remains silent and still. But then, the first signs of the transformation appear. Tiny, silver pearls of air begin to form at the very bottom of the brass, rising slowly, one by one, to the surface. This is the first breath of the water, the moment it begins to waken to the heat. The sound begins as a low, almost inaudible hum, a vibration that travels through the brass and into the still air of the room. Hum and glow. Hum and glow. As the temperature rises, the sound deepens into a soft, distant hiss, like the sound of a gentle summer rain falling on a far-off roof. It is a soothing, repetitive white noise that fills the gaps in the silence, pushing the world of the city even further away. The steam begins to rise from the spout in thin, ghostly ribbons, twisting and dancing in the drafts of the chimney. She does not wait for the kettle to whistle or rattle. She knows the exact moment when the water is soft, the perfect temperature of 80 degrees, where it is hot enough to extract the medicine but gentle enough to preserve the fragrance. She watches the steam as it rises, swirling in the golden light of the candle. Each ribbon of vapor carries a tiny bit of warmth into the chilly air of the room, softening the atmosphere and making the shadows feel less sharp. The heating of the water is a slow, rhythmic countdown to the moment of infusion. It is a time for her to sit in perfect stillness, watching the fire, listening to the hum of the brass, and feeling the weight of the night settling over the manor. The water is becoming a medium for her intentions, a liquid canvas upon which she will paint her dreams. There is a profound beauty in this waiting. It is a rebellion against the ticking of the mantle clock, a refusal to be rushed by the demands of time. The water will be ready when the fire decides, and she is content to wait for that decision. She adjusted the position of the kettle slightly with a pair of iron tongs, the metal clinking softly against the brass. The steam is thicker now, a warm, moist cloud that smells of clean rain and heated metal. It is the breath of the hearth, rising to meet her. The fire gives a sudden, satisfied crack, and a spark flies up into the darkness. At that exact moment, she knows the water is ready. It has reached its peak of gentle heat, vibrating with a silent energy that is perfectly tuned to the ground herbs in the mortar. She reaches for the handle of the kettle with a padded cloth, feeling the immense, stored warmth of the liquid inside. The water is no longer just a simple element, it has been transformed by the fire into a powerful solvent of peace. As she lifts the kettle and moves it toward her ceramic teapot, the ritual of the heat is complete, and the great marriage of the water and the earth is finally ready to begin. This was not just a drink, it was a ritual. The water has reached its perfect, gentle heat, and now the lady of the house prepares for the most sacred union of her nightly alchemy, the infusion process. This is the moment where the cold, static dust of the earth meets the living, moving energy of the warm water. She takes the ceramic teapot, a vessel made of heavy, cream-colored stoneware, and places the freshly ground herbs into its dark, hollow belly. The sound of the herbal powder hitting the ceramic is a soft, muffled thud, like the falling of a single autumn leaf onto a bed of moss. She lifts the polished brass kettle, its handle warm through the thick cloth, and begins to pour. Listen to the sound of the water as it meets the herbs. A gentle, musical, and hollow glug that echoes inside the teapot. She pours slowly, a thin, silver stream of liquid that disappears into the darkness of the vessel. As the water touches the lavender, the valerian, and the chamomile, the room is instantly transformed. This is the Great Awakening. A sudden, thick, and intoxicating cloud of aromatic steam rises from the teapot, swirling around her face and carrying the very soul of the garden into the chilly air of the bedchamber. The infusion is not a violent reaction, it is a slow, rhythmic, and deep extraction of peace. She watches as the dry, brown dust begins to swirl in the water, turning the clear liquid into a rich, amber-colored gold. The scent is overwhelming now, a complex tapestry of floral sweetness, earthy musk, and honeyed hay. It is the smell of a summer that has been captured and concentrated into a single, warm moment. She takes a small, silver spoon and begins the stirring. Stir and breathe. Stir and breathe. She moves the spoon in a slow, clockwise circle 3 times to ensure that every grain of herb is fully embraced by the water. The sound of the silver clinking against the ceramic is a bright, delicate note in the low, quiet symphony of the hearth. She places the heavy lid on the teapot, and then she covers the entire vessel with a thick, quilted silk cozy. This is the steeping, the time of silent transformation. In the Victorian apothecary's world, this waiting is the most essential part of the medicine. For 10 long minutes, the teapot must sit undisturbed near the glowing embers of the fire. She sits back on her stool, her hands resting in her lap, and she listens. The silence of the room is now filled with the heartbeat of the infusion, a quiet, internal hissing as the water pulls the essential oils out of the leaves. She watches the steam as it continues to escape from the small hole in the lid, rising in thin, ghostly ribbons that dance and vanish into the indigo shadows of the ceiling. Each ribbon of steam carries a tiny bit of the sedative power into the room, preparing her lungs for the rest that is to come. The infusion is a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. The water is becoming more than just water, it is becoming a medium for her intentions, a liquid silence that will soon flow through her veins. She does not check the clock. She knows by the way the scent changes, becoming deeper, darker, and more bitter, exactly when the infusion has reached its peak. It is a sensory clock, a timing dictated by the nose and the soul rather than the gears of a machine. The warmth from the teapot radiates outward, touching her hands and warming the air around her knees. The ritual of the infusion is a lesson in patience. It is a reminder that the best things in life, the deepest healings, cannot be rushed. They must be allowed to grow, to develop, and to bloom in their own time. And as the final minute of the steeping passes, the water has completely transformed. It is now a potent, glowing elixir of rest, vibrating with the silent energy of the earth and the fire. The infusion is complete, the herbs have given everything they have to the water, and now comes the final act of separation, the straining into glass. The lady of the house reaches for her chosen vessel, a heavy, vintage glass cup etched with delicate patterns of ivy and wild ferns. It catches the orange light of the fire, reflecting a warm, golden glow that seems to pulse in her hand. She places a fine, silver mesh strainer over the rim of the glass, its metal cool and bright against the dark wood of the table. With a steady, practiced hand, she lifts the teapot. It is heavy now, filled with the weight of the liquid piece she has created. She begins to pour. Listen to the sound of the pour. A soft, rhythmic, and musical trickle that fills the silence of the room. Trickle and pour. Trickle and pour. The amber liquid passes through the silver mesh, leaving the spent, exhausted fragments of the herbs behind. They have done their duty, they have sacrificed their dry bodies to create this golden life. She watches the glass as it fills. The liquid is clear, pure, and vibrant with color, like a piece of captured sunset held within the glass walls. As the level rises, a fresh wave of warm, moist steam hits her face, carrying the final, most potent scent of the brew. It is the smell of the complete medicine, a fragrance so deep it feels like it could still the very rotation of the earth. The trickle of the pour slows down, becoming a series of rhythmic, heavy drops, until the teapot is empty. Drip, drip, drip. The final drops of the elixir are the most concentrated, and she waits for every single one of them to fall. She sets the teapot aside and lifts the strainer, revealing the dark, wet, and steaming mass of the herbs. They smell of damp earth and faded summers, their journey finished. But in the glass, the journey is just beginning. She holds the glass in both hands, her fingers curling around the warm, smooth surface. The heat is intense but comforting, seeping through her skin and traveling up her arms to her heart. She watches the steam as it rises from the surface of the glass in gentle, swirling ribbons. The steam moves with a slow, hypnotic grace, twisting and turning in the drafts of the room before disappearing into the dark. Around her, the house is perfectly still, but the fire in the hearth gives a sudden, soft crack. A small spark flies out, glowing like a ruby for a second before fading into ash. The sound of the crackling fire is the only companion to her ritual. She looks into the depths of the amber liquid, seeing her own reflection, soft and blurred, staring back at her. This is the culmination of her alchemy. The grinding, the heating, the infusion, and the straining, they have all led to this single, beautiful cup of silence. She is no longer the woman who stood stressed and weary by the window earlier this evening. Through this process, she has already begun her descent into rest. The repetitive, sensory movements of the ritual have quieted her mind, just as the herbs will soon quiet her body. The glass feels heavy, like a solid weight of tranquility in her palms. She brings it closer to her face, closing her eyes and letting the warm vapor wash over her eyelids. The scent is now her entire world. The sound of the fire is her only clock. This was not just a drink, it was a ritual. It was her way of reclaiming her spirit from the noise of the century. It was her way of saying, I am here. I am safe, and I am ready to sleep. The glass is full, the steam is rising, and the fire is glowing. The alchemy of the hearth is finished, and the long, deep, indigo night is finally, at last, ready to carry her away into the kingdom of dreams. Stirring, rising, crackling. Stirring, rising, crackling. The ritual is complete. The herbal infusion now rests within the heavy glass, its amber depths pulsing with the reflected light of the hearth, but it is not yet a complete medicine for the soul. It lacks the weight of sweetness and the ancient, golden energy of the earth. The lady of the manor reaches for a small, squat jar made of thick, hand-cut crystal, its facets catching the orange glow of the dying embers and scattering tiny points of light across the mahogany table. Inside, golden and viscous, lies the first of her secret ingredients, honey. In the Victorian world, honey was not the thin, clear, factory-processed syrup we find on modern shelves. It was a living, breathing essence of the landscape. It was raw, unfiltered, and heavy with the pollen of 1,000 blossoms from the estate's meadows and the surrounding wild moors. To the Victorian mind, honey was liquid sunlight captured in a jar, a way to bring the warmth of a July afternoon into the biting cold of a midwinter midnight. She lifts the heavy silver spoon, its handle cool and ornate with engravings of ivy leaves, and she dips it into the thick, golden sea within the crystal jar. Listen to the sound of the extraction in the absolute silence of the room. A soft, slow, and incredibly sticky slurp as the spoon emerges, coated in a shimmering, translucent layer of gold. The honey does not pour like water, it flows with an agonizing slowness, a heavy, rhythmic drip that seems to defy the very passage of time itself. And stretch. And stretch. She holds the spoon over her glass, watching as the honey hangs in a long, elegant thread, twisting slowly in the drafts of the room like a captured sunset. It is a visual meditation, a reminder that true comfort, true healing, cannot be rushed by the ticking of the clock. As she stirs the honey into the warm infusion, the physical texture of the drink begins to transform before her very eyes. It becomes silkier, heavier, and more substantial, as if the liquid itself is gaining a protective, velvety weight. The scent of the wildflowers, clover, heather, wild thyme, and the delicate lime blossom, blooms in the rising steam, adding a layer of deep, nostalgic sweetness that rounds out the bitter, medicinal edges of the valerian and the lavender. In the Victorian apothecary's tradition, honey was more than just a sweetener, it was a demulcent, a substance that coated the nerves and the throat with a physical layer of protection. It provided a deep, internal warmth that started at the back of the throat and traveled with a slow, glowing heat down to the very core of her being. This was the comfort of the hearth in liquid form. Every rotation of the silver spoon is a deliberate act of self-preservation. Stir and dissolve. Stir and dissolve. The sound of the spoon clinking against the glass is muffled now by the growing thickness of the liquid, a low, dull, and incredibly soothing sound that fills the gaps in the night. She watches the golden clouds of honey swirl and vanish into the amber depths, making the entire infusion glow with an internal, golden light that seems to push back the indigo shadows of the room. Honey was the ingredient that turned a remedy into a ritual, a bitter dose of medicine into a sweet embrace of the spirit. Imagine the bees that gathered this nectar, flying over the quiet English countryside, touching the flowers that she herself might have walked past during her afternoon promenades. By adding this honey, she is drinking the landscape, she is absorbing the peace of the fields. It is a physical bridge between the wild, natural world and the refined, quiet comfort of her bedroom. As the warmth of the glass increases, she can feel the honey's energy radiating into her palms, moving through her skin and softening the muscles of her hands. This golden addition ensures that the sleep which follows will not just be deep, but also sweet, undisturbed by the lingering bitterness of the day's social sorrows. Stir and breathe. Stir and breathe. The honey is now one with the water, and the warmth is now one with her soul. With the golden warmth of the honey now settled, she reaches for a tiny, elegant vial made of deep cobalt blue glass, so dark it looks almost black in the flickering shadows. This is her most prized addition, a rare and precious liquid known as orange blossom water. In the 19th century, this was the ultimate scent of true luxury, a fragrant, ethereal memory of distant, sun-drenched Mediterranean groves brought into the heart of a cold, grey English manor. For the Victorian lady, this was more than just a flavor, it was a psychological key, a scent specifically designed to unlock the heavy, locked doors of the mind and allow the spirit to wander away from the suffocating burdens of the day. The fragrance of the orange blossom was believed to possess the power to dispel the vapors, quiet the restless spirits, and soothe the tired heart of the aristocracy. She removes the small, hand-carved cork stopper with a faint, musical pop that echoes softly in the absolute stillness of the room. Instantly, the air around her is fundamentally transformed. It is filled with an ethereal, light, and intoxicating floral perfume that seems to float on top of the heavier, earthier scents of the roots and the honey. It is the scent of spring, of hope, and of a pure, weightless tranquility that defies the heavy mahogany furniture and the thick, dust-laden velvet drapes. She adds only a few drops, counting them with a steady, focused hand that betrays years of quiet practice. 1, 2, 3. The drops hit the surface of the honey-sweetened tea, creating tiny, shimmering ripples that spread outward like rings on a silver pond. The orange blossom water does not change the color of the drink, but it fundamentally transforms its aura. It adds a lift to the mixture, a floral high note that makes the heavy, sedating scents of the valerian feel less like a burden and more like a beautiful, drifting dream. It is a scent that travels straight to the limbic system of the brain, telling the nervous system to let go of its final, stubborn tensions. To the Victorian lady, this was the luxury of the soul, a reminder that even in her highly regulated and often joyless life, there was still room for beauty, still room for scent, and still room for a world of sensory delight that belonged only to her in the dark. She breathes in the steam now, a complex, layered bouquet of lavender, earthy valerian, golden honey, and the high, sweet, and haunting note of the orange blossom. It is a fragrance that makes her eyelids grow heavy and her breathing grow shallow and rhythmic. The orange blossom is the true dream bringer, the scent that clears the stage of the mind and prepares it for the beautiful, floral landscapes of the imagination. It is a delicate, fragile addition, yet its psychological impact is profound and absolute. It turns her cold bedroom into a palace of peace, a sanctuary where the only thing that matters is the present moment and the rising, scented vapor of her glass. Every inhale of this floral steam is like a step further away from the manor walls. She is no longer in a drafty room in London. She is drifting through a garden of white blossoms under a warm, southern moon. The scent is nostalgic, reminding her of bridal bouquets, of summer festivals, and of the freedom of childhood. It is a scent that grants her permission to be soft, to be vulnerable, and to be at peace. She watches as the vapor swirls in the candlelight, the orange blossom scent becoming the dominant force in the atmosphere. It is a scent that speaks of purity and absolute quietude. As the fragrance settles over her like a silk veil, it creates a final barrier between her and the world outside. The ritual of the scent is complete, and the elixir is almost ready to perform its final, most powerful magic. But now, as the fire begins to settle into a deep, ruby-colored glow and the room reaches its peak of silence, we must reveal the final, and perhaps the most potent secret of the Victorian nightstand. Tucked away at the very back of her cabinet, behind the innocent jars of honey and the pretty vials of flower water, she reaches for a dark, heavy bottle made of thick, amber glass. This is an alcohol-based tincture. In the Victorian world, herbs were not always just steeped in water, they were often concentrated into powerful, spirit-based extracts using brandy, gin, or high-proof grain alcohol. This reveal is essential to understanding the true, hidden power of the 19th century nightly ritual. You see, we must debunk the modern myth that Victorian wellness was all just placebo and flowers. The truth is hidden in this dark bottle. Some of these nightly tonics were significantly, and sometimes dangerously, stronger than any modern herbal tea you might find on a shelf today. They were not just calming drinks, they were sophisticated, medicinal, and potent sedatives. The alcohol served a dual purpose in her alchemy. It acted as a powerful solvent that extracted every last drop of the plant's chemical potency, and it acted as a rapid delivery system that carried the sedative alkaloids directly into the bloodstream with a speed and efficiency that water alone could never achieve. She measures a single, dark, and syrupy dropper full into her glass. The liquid is thick, almost black, a concentrated essence of the poppy, the mandrake, or the nightshade dissolved in pure spirits. As it hits the warm, honeyed tea, it creates a dark, swirling cloud that slowly vanishes into the amber depths, leaving only a faint, sharp, and medicinal sting in the air that cuts through the sweetness of the orange blossom. This was the apothecary's shadow, the silent, powerful force that sat upon every elegant nightstand in the empire. The lady knows that this tincture is what truly bridges the gap between simple rest and absolute oblivion. It provides a heavy, physical weight to the eyelids, a sudden, profound loosening of the muscles in the neck and shoulders, and a quieting of the blood that signals the end of conscious thought. This reveal tells the story of a gritty, powerful, and sometimes risky chemistry that Victorian women mastered in the shadows. They were dealing with substances that walked a very fine line between comfort and a quiet, permanent dependence. The sharpness of the alcohol is cleverly masked by the thick honey and the fragrant orange blossom water, but its power is absolute and undeniable. It is the reason she can find peace in a world that is so loud, so demanding, and so restrictive. She looks at her glass now, a complex, potent, and ancient elixir of the night. Honey for warmth, orange blossom for luxury, and the tincture for the absolute, unwavering silence of the mind. This was the secret of the Victorian nightcap, a ritual built on deep botanical knowledge, on desperate necessity, and on a profound, dark understanding of the natural world's power over the human soul. The tonics were stronger than they appeared, and tonight, as she prepares to take her first, slow sip, she respects that strength. She knows that the world outside will continue to turn, the empires will continue to rise and fall, but for her, within this glass, there is only the silence. The fire gives one last, soft crackle, as if in agreement with her secret. The steam continues to rise, but it is heavier now, weighted with the spirits in the glass. She is ready. Her hands are warm, her mind is scented with orange blossoms, and her blood is ready for the tincture's embrace. The reveal is complete, the myth is broken, and the reality of her power is held within her palm. Tonight, her sleep will be a fortress. Tonight, she will belong only to herself. Stirring, rising, crackling. Stirring, rising, crackling. The long, deep journey into the indigo silence is finally, at last, ready to begin. The alchemy of the night is finished. The Victorian world was a masterpiece of ironclad performance, a grand theater where every gesture, every word, and even every silence was dictated by a rigid set of social laws. Outside the heavy, oak-carved doors of this bedchamber, the lady of the house was not a flesh-and-blood human being, she was an ideal. She was the angel in the house, a living symbol of British morality, family stability, and flawless social etiquette. Society's expectations demanded that she be as static, as beautiful, and as unyielding as the marble statues that lined her husband's grand hallways. She was expected to be eternally patient, perfectly composed, and perpetually radiant, even if her spirit was drowning in the cold, gray sea of her own exhaustion. Day after day, she wore the mask of the perfect lady, a porcelain face that never showed the cracks of fatigue or the shadows of despair. But here, in the indigo-tinted sanctuary of her bedroom, that grand performance finally comes to a staggering, silent halt. The private reality of the Victorian lady is a world that society was never meant to see, a world of vulnerability, raw emotion, and a desperate need for a peace that the daylight hours could never provide. The transition from the public stage to this private altar is a slow, almost painful stripping away of her identity. As she stands before her silvered mirror, the flickering candlelight reveals the truth that the gaslit drawing rooms were designed to hide. She sees the deep, dark circles beneath her eyes, the subtle tension in the set of her jaw, and the way her shoulders, freed from the weight of silk and steel, finally slump under the burden of her own existence. The world expected her to find joy in the constant cycle of tea parties, charitable visits, and formal dinners, but her reality was a profound, aching loneliness in a house full of people. Society demanded she be a source of strength for others, yet it gave her no place to be weak herself. This room, with its scent of lavender and the low hum of the fire, is the only place where the perfect lady is allowed to die, so that the woman might live for a few hours. Every object in her nightly ritual, the mortar and pestle, the blue glass vials, the heavy silver spoon, is a silent witness to this massive, hidden gap between who she is supposed to be and who she actually is. Society saw her drinking tea in the afternoon and thought she was content. It never saw her brewing the dark, herbal alchemy at midnight to still the screaming of her nerves. The contrast is as sharp as a Victorian razor. In the drawing room, her back was straight, her hands were folded, and her voice was a modulated melody of pleasantries. Here, she is allowed to be bent, she is allowed to be restless, and her voice is nothing but the slow, heavy rhythm of her own breathing. Society celebrated her natural grace, never knowing it was a performance maintained by the sheer force of her will. Her private reality is one of nervous debility, a condition that the doctors of the era diagnosed as a feminine weakness, but which was, in truth, the body's rebellion against an impossible standard. Every night, as she prepares her glass, she is looking into the abyss of this contradiction. She is a queen in public, but a prisoner of her own ritual in private. The etiquette of the Victorian day required her to be a giver, giving her time, her energy, and her very self to the needs of the empire and the home. But the etiquette of the nightcap allows her to be a taker, taking back her peace, taking back her silence, and taking back her soul from the hands of the world. This secret life is not a betrayal of her duty, it is the only thing that makes the duty possible. She lives two lives, separated by a locked door and a glass of amber liquid. The world sees the silk gown and the diamond brooch, the room sees the cotton nightgown and the trembling hand. The world sees the smile, the fire sees the sigh. This is the ultimate Victorian tragedy, that her only true freedom is found in the dark, in the cold, and in the secrecy of a ritual that society would find scandalous. Imagine her looking at the door, knowing that in a few hours, the sun will rise and she will have to put the mask back on. She will have to be the perfect lady once again, smiling at her husband across the breakfast table as if the midnight alchemy never happened. She will hide the blue bottles, she will wipe the marble mortar clean, and she will bury the memories of her private reality under layers of mourning lace. The society expects perfection, but the night allows the truth. And in this truth, she finds the strength to survive another day of pretending. The nightcap is the only bridge she has between the crushing expectations of her rank and the fragile reality of her humanity. Scries and fall. Scries and fall. The theater is over. The ritual has begun. Beyond the chemistry of the herbs and the physical warmth of the honey, there lies a much deeper, more profound layer to this nightly process. For the Victorian lady, the brewing of her tonic was not merely a way to find sleep, it was a sophisticated act of emotional escape and a rare, precious exercise of control in a life where she had almost none. Every step of the ritual, the grinding, the pouring, the stirring, was a brick in the wall she was building between herself and a world that demanded her absolute submission. In a century where her property, her body, and even her children were legally the domain of men, the herbal cabinet was the only kingdom over which she held total sovereignty. This was her quiet rebellion, a secret laboratory where she was the scientist, the judge, and the queen. The escape provided by these rituals was not just from the noise of the house, but from the relentless, internal pressure of being correct. When her fingers touch the gnarled roots of the valerian, she is escaping the soft, suffocating feel of the drawing room silks. When she breathes in the sharp, medicinal steam of the lavender, she is escaping the stale, perfumed air of social gossip and etiquette. The ritual is a doorway, a portal that leads her away from the person society made her to be and toward the person she actually is in the dark. In this emotional space, she doesn't have to be a mother, she doesn't have to be a wife, she doesn't have to be a lady. She can simply be a breathing, feeling, and dreaming entity, floating in the indigo void of the midnight hour. The control, however, is perhaps the most addictive part of the process. Think of her life during the day. Her schedule is set by others, her clothes are chosen to please others, even her thoughts must be filtered through the lens of what is proper. But here, at the hearth, she is in absolute control. She decides exactly how many grains of herb to grind. She decides exactly how many drops of the potent tincture to add. She decides the temperature of the water and the duration of the steep. This is a level of precision and autonomy that she is denied in every other facet of her existence. By manipulating the chemistry of her own consciousness, she is asserting a power that no husband or doctor can take away. She is the master of her own peace, the architect of her own oblivion. This ritual is an emotional anchor in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and industrial. The steady, rhythmic thud of the pestle against the mortar is a sound of control, a sound of her creating her own reality. The swirling of the silver spoon is a gesture of authority, a command to the water and the honey to become what she needs them to be. For 20 minutes every night, she is not a subject of the British crown, she is the sovereign of her own bedroom. This control is her medicine, a psychological tonic that heals the wounds of her daily powerlessness. Every time she measures a dose, she is reminding herself that she has agency, that she can change how she feels, and that she can find a way to survive the crushing weight of her own life. There is a profound emotional depth in the way she handles her tools. She doesn't just use them, she loves them. They are the companions of her solitude, the instruments of her freedom. The mortar is not just stone, it is the container for her stress. The fire is not just heat, it is the engine of her transformation. The escape she finds in these rituals is not a coward's flight, but a soldier's retreat, a necessary withdrawal into the fortress of the self so that she can gather the strength to return to the battlefield of the day. This is why the ritual must be slow. This is why it must be repetitive. Because each repetition reinforces her control, and each slow moment deepens her escape. As she takes the first sip of her elixir, the escape is complete. The control has been exercised. The boundary has been set. The world of society, with its cold expectations and its hollow manners, is now 1,000,000 miles away. She is drifting now, not because she is weak, but because she has used her knowledge and her power to set herself free. These rituals are the secret heart of the Victorian woman, the hidden architecture of her emotional survival. They are the proof that even in the most restrictive of eras, the human spirit will find a way to breathe, to control its own destiny, and to escape into the beautiful, healing darkness of the night. Stirring, rising, crackling. The escape is permanent for the night. The control is absolute. The lady is finally, at last, herself. As the night reaches its deepest, most profound point of absolute silence, and the world beyond the heavy velvet curtains seems to have ceased its very existence, we must speak with the softest of whispers about a truth that lived within the indigo shadows of these grand Victorian manors. It was a quiet, persistent, and deeply private reality that many women of this era carried like a hidden weight within their hearts, a truth that was never discussed in the brightly lit drawing rooms or over the polite clatter of afternoon tea. You see, for some, this nightly ritual of brewing the herbal elixir was no longer just an occasional comfort for a restless evening. It was no longer a simple remedy for a stray thought. It had become a daily necessity, a rhythmic requirement that the body, the mind, and the very soul demanded before they would agree to surrender to the overwhelming power of the dark. These women, these silent architects of the night, began to rely on their herbal tonics with a devotion that bordered on the sacred, a quiet, unwavering commitment that shaped the very architecture of their existence. It was a gentle, almost invisible reliance, a soft, silken tether that pulled them back to the heavy mahogany apothecary cabinet every single time the sun began to slip behind the distant, cold moors. Imagine the lady of the house standing by her tall sash window, her hand resting on the cool glass as she watches the very first streak of deep blue enter the evening sky. She does not feel a sudden surge of fear, but she feels a subtle, undeniable, and magnetic pull toward her crystal jars and her dark glass vials. For her, the day has been a long, grueling, and exhausting performance of social graces, rigid expectations, and silent endurance. Her nerves are not just tired, they are frayed like old silk, vibrating with a high-pitched tension that the daylight world refuses to acknowledge or comfort. She knows with a terrifying certainty that without her lavender, without the earthy grounding of her valerian, and without the sharp, medicinal sting of her alcohol-based tinctures, the night will not be a sanctuary for her. It will be a battlefield of racing thoughts, a theater of nervous exhaustion, and a hollow echo of her own anxieties. And so, she relies. She relies on the herbs as a lost sailor relies on the steady position of the stars to find his way home through a dark and stormy sea. This daily reliance was born out of a desperate, quiet, and profound need for a space where the world could not reach her, a space where she was no longer a lady, but simply a woman who breathed. In the 19th century, a woman's life was rarely, if ever, her own. Her time was managed by the clock, her body was managed by the corset, and her very thoughts were filtered through the heavy, suffocating lens of what was proper and moral. The nightly tonic was the only thing she truly possessed, the only thing she could count on to give her back to herself when the rest of the world was asleep. It became her liquid anchor, the one constant in a life of shifting social duties, overwhelming domestic pressures, and the cold silence of her rank. Day after day, year after year, this ritual became more than a habit, it became a part of her breathing, a part of her internal pulse, and a vital part of her survival. She did not view it as a weakness of character, but as a necessary armor against the crushing weight of her own existence. Every evening, as the shadows grew long and the gaslights were dimmed, she would move toward her cabinet with a practiced, almost hypnotic grace. Her hands knew the exact weight of every heavy glass jar. Her fingers knew the exact, papery texture of every dried leaf and every gnarled root. This was the daily devotion of the hearth, a ritual that was as essential to her survival as her morning prayers or her afternoon correspondence. But unlike those public acts of duty, this was hers alone. It was a secret she kept from her husband, from her children, and from the prying eyes of the servants. The reliability of the herbs provided a sense of profound, unshakable security in a world that felt increasingly chaotic and industrial. She knew exactly how the valerian would slow the frantic racing of her heart. She knew exactly how the thick, golden honey would warm her blood and soften the edges of her sorrow. And she knew, with a quiet, steely certainty, exactly how the alcohol-based tinctures would pull the heavy, dark velvet curtains across the stage of her mind. This reliance was a soft, indigo-tinted blanket that she wrapped around her spirit every single evening, protecting herself from the cold, unforgiving light of the world she was forced to live in. As we watch her now, her silhouette bathed in the dim, flickering firelight, we see not a woman who is broken or defeated, but a woman who has found a brilliant and secret way to endure. Her reliance on these tonics was a testament to the sheer intensity of the world she had to face every single morning. If the day was a mountain of iron that she had to climb, the night was a river of silk that she could float upon, and the tonic was the bridge that allowed her to cross between them safely. She relied on it because she had to. She relied on it because there was no other way to be still in a world that demanded she never stop. The repetitive, rhythmic clink of her silver spoon against the glass is the heartbeat of that reliance, a sound of a woman taking back her peace, one drop, one leaf, and one indigo night at a time. It was a gentle, daily surrender to the power of the earth, a way to ensure that when the absolute darkness finally came, she would not be left alone with her own thoughts. The reliance grew slowly, like the ivy climbing the manor walls. At first, it was a spoonful of chamomile on a winter's night. Then, it was a drop of lavender on a stressful afternoon. And eventually, it became the full ritual, the grinding, the heating, the brewing. She became a student of her own dependency, learning the subtle nuances of her body's cravings. She knew the difference between a tension headache and a spiritual longing, and she knew which bottle held the cure for each. This was her secret life, her hidden expertise. In a world that gave her no power, she found power in the glass. She found a way to dictate the terms of her own consciousness. And though the world outside might judge her, the night understood her. The herbs were her friends when the world was a stranger. The fire was her companion when the house was cold. And the tonic was her savior when the day was too much to bear. One more stir, one more breath, and the reliance is complete for another night. In the soft, flickering, and dying light of the embers in the hearth, the boundary between a remedy and a dependency begins to fade away, becoming as thin, as translucent, and as elusive as the steam rising in ghostly ribbons from her glass. This is the most delicate, most mysterious, and perhaps the most haunting part of the Victorian apothecary's story. We must ask ourselves, in the absolute stillness of this room, where does the healing end, and where does the desperate need begin? For the lady of the house, sitting alone in her nightgown, the line was never sharp or clear, it was never a wall of stone that she crossed knowingly. It was a blurred line, a shifting mist of indigo, shadow, and memory. When a remedy is used every single night to heal the invisible wounds of the day, it slowly, almost imperceptibly, transforms into a companion that the soul cannot bear to leave behind. The cure and the craving become two sides of the same silver coin, flipping over and over in the quiet, lonely hours of the night. To the Victorian mind, the word dependency was rarely, if ever, used in the harsh, clinical way we understand it in our modern world. They spoke of habit, they spoke of constitution, and they spoke of the absolute necessity of restorative rest. They lived in an era where the nerves were seen as a delicate system of wires that could easily become overwrought, and the herbal tonic was simply the oil that kept the machine from breaking. But as the years passed like shadows across the lawn, the lady knew in her heart that the power of her cabinet had grown. The lavender that once brought a light, floral calm now required the heavy, dark reinforcement of the valerian. The chamomile that once invited sleep with a gentle whisper now needed the sharp, burning, and immediate support of the alcohol-based extracts. The remedy was still there, it was still providing the profound peace she craved, but it was no longer a simple choice she made at the end of the day, it was an agreement she had signed with the night. It was an agreement between her physical body and the botanical world that she would never, under any circumstances, have to face the cold, hollow darkness of the night without her medicine. This blurred line was not a source of shame for her, but a source of quiet, heavy, and deeply personal reflection. She looks into the amber, glowing depths of her glass, seeing her own reflection blurred and distorted by the rising vapor and the flickering firelight. She asks herself, in the profound silence of her heart, if she is still the master of the herbs, or if the herbs have slowly, silently become the master of her. Is the sleep she finds tonight a generous gift of nature, or is it a demand made by the medicine that her body can no longer refuse? This is the apothecary's paradox, the central mystery of her nightly life. The more she uses the ritual to gain a sense of control over her frantic life, the more she becomes tethered, heart and soul, to the ritual itself. But in the Victorian world, this was a price she was more than willing to pay. The alternative was far too frightening to contemplate. To live without the tonic meant facing the nervous collapse, the hysteria, and the unending wakefulness that the doctors warned against. It meant lying in the dark for hours, listening to the house creak and her own mind scream with the weight of her duties. Compared to that, the dependency was her sanctuary, a fortress of glass and herbs that she had built stone by stone to keep the world's noise away. The blurred line was her safety net. Even if she was a prisoner to the bottle, it was a prison that felt like a velvet embrace. The tone of her ritual remains soft, remains gentle, and remains elegant, but underneath the sweet scent of roses and the warmth of the honey, there is the deep, heavy, and undeniable pulse of the stronger tonics. She knows, through whispers and shared glances, that many of her sisters in the great houses of London and the countryside have crossed this line even further than she has. She knows of women who have turned to the laudanum, the chloral, and the opium with a desperate, unyielding thirst that no flower could ever quench. But she keeps her balance on the blurred line with the grace of a tightrope walker. She treats her dependency with the same strict etiquette and refined grace that she treats every other part of her life. She measures her dark drops with the same unwavering precision. She stirs her glass with the same rhythmic elegance. Whether it is a remedy for her frayed nerves or a dependency of her lonely spirit, it is hers. It is her secret, her truth, and her only true friend in the dark. As the fire sinks lower and the room becomes a vast cavern of soft, blue, and shifting shadows, the distinction between the remedy and the dependency finally ceases to matter. In the deep, indigo peace of the midnight hour, they merge into a single, healing, and overwhelming force. They are both part of the final surrender. They are both part of the great silence. She takes a long, slow, and incredibly rhythmic sip of her elixir, feeling the blurred line disappear as the warmth spreads through her veins and her mind begins to drift. It doesn't matter what the doctors would call it. It doesn't matter what society would say if they could see her now. All that matters is the absolute stillness. All that matters is the way the world is finally, at last, quiet. She is drifting now, on the river of her own creation, far away from the shore of the living. The dependency is the boat that carries her, and the remedy is the water that keeps her afloat. They are inseparable, two parts of the same long journey into the heart of the night. The ritual of the nightcap has done its work perfectly. It has given her back her peace, even if it has taken a small, hidden piece of her autonomy in return. She closes her eyes, the scent of lavender and the sharp sting of the spirit lingering on her lips like a final kiss. The blurred line is gone. There is only the darkness. There is only the rest. There is only the deep, ancient, and herbal silence that she has earned with every single drop, every stir of the spoon, and every heavy breath. The night is no longer a threat, it is an ocean, and she is finally ready to sink to the bottom. Scries and fall. Scries and fall. The surrender is total, the remedy is complete, and the night is finally, eternally, hers. The glass is now a warm, solid weight in her hands, its amber surface stilled, its steam rising in the faintest, most delicate of silver ribbons. The lady of the house sits in the absolute, velvety silence of her chamber, her fingers curled around the smooth, etched surface of the cup. This is the moment she has labored for, the culmination of the grinding, the heating, and the secret, potent additions. Slowly, with a movement that feels as if it is happening in a dream, she lifts the glass to her lips. The first contact is the scent, a concentrated, heavy cloud of lavender, honey, and the sharp, medicinal promise of the alcohol-based tinctures. It is a fragrance that fills her senses, telling her mind that the journey is almost over. She takes the first, tiny sip. Listen to the silence of the swallow. The liquid is warm, thick, and silk-like as it moves across her tongue. It carries the bitter-sweet soul of the valerian and the golden comfort of the honey. It is not a drink, it is a physical embrace that starts from within. She lets the liquid linger, feeling its warmth radiate through the roof of her mouth and down into her throat. Each sip is a deliberate act of letting go. She drinks slowly, counting the seconds between each swallow, 1, 2, 3, 4. The world of the manor, the world of the city, and the world of her duties are all dissolving into this single, warm stream of herbal peace. As she continues to drink, she feels the liquid moving through her, a glowing river of indigo calm that travels to the very tips of her fingers. The glass grows lighter in her hands, but her body grows heavier. She follows the path of the tonic as it settles in her chest, a warm weight that seems to still the frantic beating of her heart. The bitterness of the herbs is no longer a harshness, it is a grounding force, a reminder of the earth's ancient power. The sweetness of the honey is no longer a flavor, it is a shield against the cold. She drinks until the glass is nearly empty, watching the last few drops swirl at the bottom like liquid amber. The final sip is the most potent, the most concentrated essence of her alchemy. She takes it with a long, slow intake of breath, feeling the sharp sting of the tincture one last time before it vanishes into the warmth. The glass is now empty, a hollow, cold vessel that has done its duty. She sets it down on the mahogany table with a soft, muffled, and final clink. The sound echoes for a moment in the stillness before being swallowed by the shadows. The drinking is finished. The elixir is inside her now, beginning its silent work, turning her blood into a slow-moving river of sleep. She breathes out a long, weary sigh, the scent of orange blossoms still lingering on her breath. The first stage of the final surrender is complete. With the glass set aside, the physical transformation begins to take hold, a slow, creeping heaviness that starts at the very edges of her being and moves inward toward the core. The lady leans back into the deep, upholstered chair, her body beginning to melt into the fabric as if the bones themselves are turning to soft wax. This is the weight of the night, the moment where the gravity of the earth finally claims her. It starts in her feet, the tension of 1,000 steps taken during the day simply evaporating into the cold floorboards. Her toes grow heavy, then her ankles, then her calves. Each muscle is unspooling like a length of silk ribbon, losing its grip, losing its tightness. The heaviness moves upward, into her knees and through her thighs. She can feel the blood in her legs moving with a slow, thick, and rhythmic pulse, a pulse that is no longer dictated by the frantic ticking of the clock, but by the deep, herbal currents of the tonic. Her hips settle into the cushions, the base of her spine finally finding its absolute rest. The chair seems to rise up to meet her, cradling her as if she were a child again. Her abdomen relaxes, the internal knots of anxiety that she has carried since breakfast finally untying themselves in the warmth of the herbs. Every breath she takes is a surrender, every exhale is a release of the day's ironclad constraints. Then, the relaxation reaches her hands. The fingers that were so busy with pins, pens, and embroidery are now perfectly still, resting like fallen leaves upon the white lace of her nightgown. They are heavy, so heavy that the idea of moving them feels like a distant, impossible dream. The weight travels up her arms, softening her elbows and pulling her shoulders down, away from her ears, away from the burdens of her rank. Her neck, which has held her head high and proud all day for the eyes of society, finally bows. The muscles in her throat soften, and her jaw, so long clenched in a polite smile, drops slightly into a state of total, unburdened peace. She feels a strange, beautiful sensation, as if her body is no longer a solid thing, but a fluid essence that is expanding to fill the room. The boundary between her skin and the air is disappearing. She is becoming part of the shadows, part of the velvet, part of the silence. The heaviness is not a burden, it is a comfort, a thick, warm blanket made of lavender and valerian that is wrapping itself around her spirit. She is sinking, sinking, sinking into the deep, indigo depths of the chair. Her heart is beating like a distant drum, slow, steady, and far away. Every cell in her body is singing a silent song of rest. The body is no longer a vessel of labor, it is a temple of repose. The physical world is receding, leaving only the sensation of floating in a sea of dark, herbal peace. The fire in the hearth has died down to a bed of glowing, ruby embers, and now the only light remaining in the vast chamber is the single candle on the mahogany table. The flame is small, fragile, and exhausted. It has burned through the hours of the ritual, witnessing every grind of the mortar and every stir of the glass. Now, it too is preparing for the final darkness. The lady watches the flame with heavy, half-closed eyes, her vision beginning to blur as the herbs cloud her mind with a beautiful, silver mist. The candle is a tiny island of gold in a sea of deepening indigo, a final, flickering signal from the world of the living. The flame begins to dance, not with energy, but with the slow, rhythmic drafts of the night. It stretches tall and thin, then sinks into a small, blue point of light, then rises again. It is a heartbeat made of fire. The wax has pulled at the base of the wick, a clear, liquid mirror that reflects the dying light. As the wick grows shorter, the shadows in the corners of the room begin to move, creeping forward like silent, velvet animals, reclaiming the space that the light once held. The heavy mahogany wardrobe, the tall sash window, the silvered mirror, they are all disappearing, one by one, into the absolute embrace of the dark. She watches the candle, and she feels her own consciousness fading in perfect sync with the flame. The light is no longer a tool for seeing, it is a hypnotist's charm. Each flicker is a pulse of peace, each dip of the wick is a step closer to the dream world. The scent of the burning wax, a faint, honeyed smell, mixes with the lingering perfume of the orange blossoms, creating a final, intoxicating bouquet for the night. The room is becoming a place of textures and sounds rather than sights. The flame is now so low that it barely casts a shadow on the wall. It is a tiny, golden spark, a final thought before sleep takes hold. The wick gives one last, valiant struggle, a bright, sudden flare that illuminates the lace on her sleeve for a fraction of a second. And then, it begins to sink. The blue at the base of the flame expands, swallowing the orange. The room grows colder, the darkness more absolute. She does not fear the fading light, she welcomes it. The light was the day, but the darkness is her own. The candle is no longer a flame, it is a glowing ember on a charred thread. A single, thin ribbon of gray smoke rises from the cooling wax, twisting in the air like a ghostly farewell. The light is gone. The island of gold has vanished. The room is now a perfect, uninterrupted void of indigo and black. The candle has finished its work, and the darkness is now complete. In the absolute darkness of the chamber, the only thing that remains is the sound of the night's breath. The lady of the house is now a shadow among shadows, her physical presence marked only by the slow, rhythmic, and deep movement of her lungs. The tonic has reached the very center of her being, and the chemistry of the herbs has taken full command of her life's pulse. Her breathing is no longer the shallow, hurried intake of the stressed day, it has become a profound, elemental tide. Inhale. Exhale. The pace is incredibly slow, a long, oceanic swell that seems to take an eternity to rise and an eternity to fall. Each breath is a heavy, velvet wave that pulls her further away from the shore of reality. As she inhales, she feels the cold, herbal air filling the vast spaces of her lungs, cooling her blood and stilling her thoughts. As she exhales, she releases the last, tiny fragments of her identity, her name, her rank, her memories. They drift away into the darkness like autumn leaves on a black river. The pauses between the breaths are growing longer, a profound silence that exists in the gap between living and dreaming. In these pauses, there is no time. There is no Victorian era. There is only the absolute, healing stillness of the void. Her chest rises with an agonizing slowness, a movement so subtle it is almost invisible. It is the breath of the earth itself, the breath of the ancient forests and the sleeping moors. She is no longer breathing for herself, she is being breathed by the night. The sound of the air moving in and out of her body is a soft, rhythmic hiss, a sound like the distant wind in the pines or the smallest waves on a midnight beach. Hiss and sigh. Hiss and sigh. The heart matches the breath, a low, muffled thump that is spaced so far apart it feels like a secret. She is drifting now, far out into the indigo deep. The tonic has turned the world into a soft, blurred landscape of silver mist and dark water. She is floating, weightless, beyond the reach of gravity, beyond the reach of pain, and beyond the reach of the morning. Every breath is a step down a long, dark staircase into the kingdom of somnus. The air is sweet, the dark is kind, and the silence is absolute. The breathing is now so slow that it seems to merge with the very silence of the house. She is almost gone. The lady is no longer a lady. The woman is no longer a woman. There is only the breath. There is only the night. There is only the deep, herbal sleep that has finally, at last, arrived. Inhale. Exhale. The surrender is total. The darkness is her home. In the deep, velvet darkness of our modern world, where the blue light of glass screens and the relentless hum of electricity never truly fade, we must pause to look back at the flickering candle in that Victorian bedchamber. The comparison between the Victorian lady's nightly ritual and our own modern sleep routines is not just a study of time, it is a study of the human soul's desperate search for a sanctuary. Today, we live in an era of efficiency, where sleep is often viewed as a biological necessity to be managed, an obstacle to be overcome, or a problem to be solved with a quick, white pill swallowed with a gulp of water in a brightly lit kitchen. Our routine is fast, it is clinical, and it is often devoid of the sacred silence that once defined the end of the day. Imagine the Victorian lady, her hands stained with the oils of lavender and the dust of valerian, standing in stark contrast to the modern woman, her thumb scrolling through an endless stream of digital noise just moments before closing her eyes. The Victorian lady understood that sleep was not a switch to be flipped, but a long, slow bridge to be built between the noise of the world and the silence of the spirit. Her routine was an alchemy of time, a slow, deliberate deceleration that began hours before the head hit the pillow. Our modern routine, by comparison, is often a sudden, jarring halt, a frantic attempt to shut down a brain that has been overstimulated by 1,000 artificial suns. Where we have the clinical white of the pharmacy bottle, she had the deep amber of the hand-blown glass vial. Where we have the hum of the air conditioner, she had the soft, rhythmic crackling of the dying embers in the hearth. The Victorian routine was tactile, sensory, and deeply grounded in the physical world. It was a ritual of the hands, the nose, and the heart. Our routines have become increasingly detached, moving into the realm of the invisible and the digital. We track our sleep with cold, metallic sensors on our wrists, measuring the quality of our rest in data and percentages, while she measured her rest in the weight of her eyelids and the sweetness of her herbal infusions. There is a profound loss in this transition from the apothecary's ritual to the modern management. In the 19th century, the act of preparing for sleep was a declaration of autonomy, a private ceremony that honored the body's need for transition. Today, our routines are often dictated by the demands of the next morning, a preparation for labor rather than a surrender to peace. The Victorian lady's cold, quiet, and controlled environment was a fortress she built against the Industrial Revolution. Our modern bedrooms, filled with the invisible waves of Wi-Fi and the glowing standby lights of technology, are often extensions of the office. However, when we look closer, we see that the human need has not changed at all. The Victorian lady's reliance on her tonics was a response to a world that was becoming too loud, too fast, and too demanding. Is our own reliance on sleep apps, white noise machines, and chemical aids any different? We are both reaching for the same thing, a way to silence the internal chatter, a way to still the racing heart, and a way to disappear into the indigo depths where the world cannot find us. The tools have changed, the science has evolved, but the yearning for the final surrender remains the same. The Victorian lady's ritual was a slow walk into the woods, while our routine is often a leap into the dark. Perhaps, in comparing the two, we find a missing piece of ourselves, a reminder that the soul does not want efficiency, it wants a ritual. It wants the steam, the scent, and the slow, rhythmic breath of the night. As the 21st century marches on with its digital velocity, a strange and beautiful thing is happening, a quiet resurgence of the ancient ways. We see it in the global herbal tea culture of today, a modern echo of the Victorian apothecary's cabinet that has found its way into our stainless steel kitchens and our minimalist living rooms. Even in our world of synthetic miracles and rapid cures, we find ourselves reaching back for the lavender, back for the chamomile, and back for the comforting weight of a warm ceramic mug. This is not merely a trend of wellness, it is a primal instinct, a collective memory of a time when the earth was our primary healer. Today, the herbal tea market is a vast, global industry, yet at its core, it remains the same science of the hearth that the Victorian lady practiced in the shadows. We buy boxes of tea bags with elegant labels promising nightly calm or deep sleep, often unaware that the ingredients inside, the passion flower, the lemon balm, the valerian, are the exact same guardians that stood in the amber jars of the 1880s. The modern tea ritual is our attempt to reclaim the blue hour, a way to tell our nervous systems that the work is done and the night has arrived. Even if we do not grind our own roots or heat our water over a bed of embers, the act of pouring boiling water over dried leaves remains one of the few truly ancient gestures we have left in our daily lives. The sensory storytelling of the Victorian lady has become the sensory marketing of today, but the impact on the human spirit is the same. We seek the floral scent that softens the mind, the warmth that spreads through the palms, and the rhythmic steam that swirls in the dim light of our bedside lamps. Herbal tea culture has become a secular ritual, a moment of mindfulness in a world that is anything but mindful. It is our way of slowing down the clock, of creating a small, scented barrier between ourselves and the demands of the digital era. The Victorian lady would recognize the look of peace on a modern face as they take that first, steaming sip. She would know that feeling of the world's weight finally beginning to slide off the shoulders. But there is a difference in our modern herbal culture, a lack of the apothecary's risk and the folklore mix. Our teas are standardized, tested, and safe. We have lost the dark, mysterious edge of the Victorian tonic, the sense that we are dealing with a powerful and unpredictable force of nature. Our herbal tea is a gentle suggestion of sleep, whereas her tonic was a command. Yet, the intention is identical. We are both using the botanical world as a bridge. We are both seeking the comfort of the earth to counteract the noise of the city. The herbal tea culture of today is a testament to the Victorian legacy, a proof that some things, like the scent of lavender on a cold pillow, are timeless and essential to the human experience. It is the one place where the 19th century manor and the 21st century apartment truly meet, in the quiet steam of a nighttime cup. The fire has almost entirely faded now, leaving only a faint, pulsing glow in the center of the hearth, and as we reach the end of this journey, we come to a profound realization. Ritual. Humans still search for ritual, with a hunger that no amount of technology or modern medicine can ever truly satisfy. In the deep architecture of our DNA, there is a requirement for the sacred, a need for repetitive, sensory actions that signal the transition from one state of being to another. The Victorian lady's nightly alchemy was not just about the chemicals in the herbs, it was about the ritual itself. It was the grinding, the stirring, the waiting, and the pouring that did the real work of healing the soul. We see this search for ritual everywhere in our modern lives, though we often call it by different names. We call it a skincare routine, we call it meditation, we call it digital detox. But underneath the modern vocabulary, it is the same ancient search for a sacred circle. We are looking for a way to mark the boundaries of our lives, to create a space where the rules of the world do not apply. The Victorian lady found her ritual in the apothecary cabinet, and we find ours in the rhythmic application of creams, the lighting of a scented candle, or the slow, deliberate folding of our clothes for the next day. Why do we still search for these rituals? Because a ritual is a way of taking control of time. In a ritual, time does not move at the pace of the industrial machine or the digital clock, it moves at the pace of the human heart. When the Victorian lady stirred her spoon 3 times to the right, she was asserting her power over her own consciousness. When we sit in the dark and listen to the rain, or when we follow a specific sequence of actions before bed, we are doing the same thing. We are saying to the universe, "For this moment, I am the master of my own peace." Ritual provides a sense of order in a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming. It provides predictability in a life that is full of surprises. And most importantly, it provides meaning. The Victorian lady's nightcap was not just a drink, it was a story she told herself about her own value, her own need for rest, and her own connection to the earth. Our modern rituals are the same. They are the stories we tell ourselves to stay sane in a world that demands we be machines. We search for the ritual because we know, deep in our bones, that we cannot just stop. We must be guided out of the day, hand in hand with the scents, the textures, and the sounds of the night. As the last ember in the hearth turns to ash, and the room is swallowed by the absolute darkness of the indigo night, we recognize that we are not so different from the woman in the lace nightgown. We are both travelers in the dark, seeking the same sanctuary, using the same ancient botanical guardians, and following the same rhythmic path toward the kingdom of dreams. The legacy of the elixir is not in the glass, it is in the ritual. It is in the slow, steady, and beautiful surrender of the self to the mystery of the night. The ritual continues. The herbs are waiting. The silence is calling. And the human heart, as it always has, and always will, finds its way home through the alchemy of the night. Stirring, rising, crackling. Stirring, rising, crackling. The journey is over, the ritual is complete, and the rest is finally, beautifully, ours. The long, sensory journey through the Victorian night has finally reached its destination, and the chamber has become a profound sanctuary of absolute, heavy, and indigo-tinted peace. The lady of the house has long since retreated into the deep, soft, and yielding embrace of her high linen bed, and her breathing is now nothing more than a distant, rhythmic, and oceanic swell in the thick darkness of the room. The tall, brooding mahogany wardrobe, the silver-backed brushes on the dressing table, and the heavy oak apothecary cabinet are all now just faint, indistinct, and dark shapes in the velvet gloom. The world of the Victorian morning, with its rigid duties and social masks, is hours away, a lifetime away, and here, in this small, scented circle of total stillness, there is only the silence. The fire has dimmed. The once vibrant orange tongues of flame that danced so lively in the hearth have finally retreated, leaving behind only a glowing, pulsing heart of ruby-colored embers. They glow with a slow, weary, and dying heat, as if the fire itself is struggling to keep its eyes open against the weight of the night. Every few minutes, a tiny, crystalline clink can be heard in the stillness as the embers settle deeper into the soft, gray ash, finding their own version of rest. The warmth in the room is no longer a radiant heat, it is a soft, lingering memory of the fire, a gentle presence that stays close to the floorboards. The shadows are no longer moving or flickering, they have found their permanent places in the corners, under the heavy bed frame, and behind the thick velvet curtains, settling in for the long, quiet hours of the midnight watch. The fire has done its duty, it has warmed the water, it has witnessed the sacred ritual of the herbs, and now, it is ready to fade into the cool, soft silence of the morning. As the last spark dies, the room feels larger, more expansive, as if the darkness itself is a physical comfort that is expanding to fill every crack and crevice. The cold air from the window is now perfectly balanced by the warmth of the heavy quilts. The cycle of the hearth is over. The alchemy of the flame has finished its work. The distant, mysterious creaks of the manor's ancient timbers have finally settled. The heavy, thick stone walls have absorbed the last of the day's frantic echoes and the last of the evening's whispers. There are no footsteps echoing in the long, dark hallways, no rustle of silk in the drawing rooms, no rattle of horse-drawn carriages on the distant cobblestones outside the iron gates. The absolute, crushing, and velvety silence of the 19th century has claimed every room, every staircase, and every hollow space within the house. It is a silence that feels physical, a thick, dark veil that wraps itself around the manor, protecting it from the noise and the friction of the turning world. Inside this silence, the faint scent of the lavender and the orange blossom still hangs like a ghost in the air, a lingering, floral signature of the ritual that has passed. The apothecary's knowledge is now tucked away, the glass vials are still, the mortar is empty, and the silver key is silent against her skin. The ritual was her bridge, and she has crossed it. The house is no longer a place of social expectation, it is a tomb for the day and a cradle for the night. Every piece of furniture, every heavy curtain, and every shadow is now a guardian of her absolute repose. And now, in this moment of total tranquility, I invite you, the listener, to follow her into that same, deep, and herbal peace. Feel the weight of your own body as it settles deeper and deeper into the blankets. Feel the gravity of the earth as it gently pulls the final remnants of tension from your shoulders, your hands, and your mind. The alchemy of the night is finished. The bridge between the day and the dream world has been crossed. You are no longer in the world of labor, or duty, or light. You are in the world of the night, the world of the indigo deep, where the only requirement is to let go, and to be still. Let your breathing match the slow, steady, and ancient pulse of the house. Let the darkness be a comfort to you, a kind and protective layer between your soul and the outside world. There is nothing left to do. No more grinding of the herbs, no more stirring of the spoon, no more thinking of the morning. Only the drifting, only the sinking, only the absolute rest. The night is a vast, calm, and endless ocean, and you are a single leaf floating upon its dark surface, moving slowly. Imagine the mist rising outside the window, covering the moors in a white shroud. Imagine the moon moving silently behind the clouds. The world is at peace. You are at peace. The lavender on your pillow, the warmth in your limbs, and the silence in your heart are all merging into one single sensation of slumber. The lady is asleep, the manor is asleep, and the universe itself seems to be holding its breath for you. Every inhale brings you closer to the dream, every exhale carries you further from the shore of the living. The moral reflection. In a world that demands your constant motion and your absolute presence, the greatest act of rebellion, and the most profound act of healing, is to reclaim your silence and surrender to the night. Everything is ready for the end. The candle has been snuffed. The fire is but a memory in the ash. The soul has found its sanctuary. The lady is asleep, the house is asleep, and now you may sleep too. The journey is over. The rest is total. The silence is absolute. Sleep.